The boss was angry, throwing papers around and scolding the woman for the bad report, asking if she really thought this was normal. The director told her to stay after work and redo the report. If she doesn't, he'll fire her. She has only herself to blame. There was tension at work again. June came up to apologize that he was leaving. She allowed it because he had worked well today. June noted that she would have to sit until nightfall. She said that this was a common occurrence and everything would be fine. Kang Hyun overworked again. In the office, she suddenly died without feeling her body. She thought it might have been an explosion. Alone as always, death at work is sad. But now there will be no pain. This even consoled her a little. The man shouted that she was ignoring him, and again, not respecting Margaret. He said that he had told her this more than once. The heroine did not believe that this was possible. After her death, she was reborn in the body of a villain from a female strategy game. Garden of Guardians is a game where you need to build relationships with one of 4 heroes. It is both a strategy and an RPG top in Korea. That life was hateful, so it's not a pity to die. But why she became a villain is unclear. Valita Alden is the daughter of a marquis, beautiful and noble, but she has a terrible character and a nasty temper. The Alden family is almost equal to the imperial family. Margaret considers Valita a friend, but she constantly humiliates her. In the good ending, Margaret is saved by one of the gentlemen who kills Valita. In one of them, it is her brother Luther who does this. The heroine realized that she had been refusing Margaret for a long time, and the man in front of her was her brother, one of Margaret's suitors. Luther screamed, asking if she was crazy to laugh at him. He raised his hand, but she was not going to suffer. The girl fell to her knees. Luther was shocked. Usually she was like a madwoman, and here she was suddenly so submissive. He turned around and said that this wouldn't work anymore. If he hurt Margaret again, he would give her to the dogs. She felt hurt. Why did she meet him now? And why did she behave so humiliatingly in front of this beast? She wanted to play with him, but now she decided he and Margaret will disappear. For the villain, the good ending is death. In the bad ending, the heroine dies. Valita told Margaret to be called when the maid said she was waiting in the living room. A hidden task appeared on the screen. Complete the game and return home. Failure means being stuck in the game forever. Valita was surprised because she didn't remember adding such a menu herself. She decided that it was just an automatic setting. The game was created by her, but the rules did not suit her. The girl decided that she would not allow herself to be killed and would rewrite the plot. Margaret is the heroine, everyone's favorite, but she is the one who always kills Valita. To survive, you have to gain her trust. When they met, Valita asked with tears if she had offended her. Such behavior surprised Margaret. The girl justified herself, but Margaret didn't believe her. She was too worried. The girl called her an incredible beauty. The heroine admitted that she thought Margaret wouldn't come. After all, they hadn't spoken for a week. She must have been offended. In the script, Margaret is always kind to Valita, no matter what she is. Now the heroine felt shame in her body. Valita apologized, said that she had often offended her, but if not forgiveness, then at least the friendship remained. Margaret was only surprised. They were friends after all. The real Valita would never apologize like that. It became clear to Valita that Margaret was too kind. She should not get involved with people like Luther. The girl felt better from Margaret's words, but Luther scolded her for ignoring her, so she was worried and tried not to make mistakes. Margaret was shocked. She would not have asked to scold Vela. She also asked if Luther had insulted her friend again. Margaret hugged Vela, promised to explain everything to Luther and protect their friendship. Vela knew he would be angry. The girl was happy. Everything was getting better. She just needed to be near Margaret. She believed that now nothing would separate them. Valita decided to support Margaret, but she was afraid that she would not last long. She did not know at all how to behave according to etiquette. The girl didn't understand why the dinner that Carlin Alden hosted every 2 weeks was taking place today. Only children with gray hair and green eyes are considered heirs. The rest were expelled along with their mother. There was tension in the house. The head of the family was deciding who deserved to stay and who did not. Valita felt like she was finished. One of the guys started bragging that their magic goods were bought by the imperial family itself. Carlin asked how he knew that. The guy said he had people in the palace and only rave reviews about the goods. The girl was surprised how he was not afraid of flattery. Luther said that his spy was useless, just collecting rumors. His father agreed with him and told him not to believe the gossip. Valita had no time for other people's problems. She was afraid of attracting attention. She regretted not having hired a maid and began cutting the steak herself. Suddenly, there was a noise, but the father ordered silence. A steak fell on Valita's head. The father was angry for disturbing the silence. The father kicked Valita out, saying that she would not leave until she learned some manners. He promised to kill her if she did not learn to eat civilized food. She was quickly thrown out, and Luther said that she was a disgrace and had asked for her own death. She may have made this world up, but it was little different from her old one. She decided to change everything. The real Valita lived in the same hell. She is 18, and in the game she was 21, so the heroine has 3 years. The newspaper only confirmed her fears. Everything is terrible, but she made it all up, so there is no point in being indignant. To survive, the heroine needs to establish a relationship with Margaret and force the right people to act according to her plan. In this world, there is magic and artifacts that give power. The Aldens supplied them to the palace and became rich. People were used for artifacts without mana, into slavery with mana, for materials. Everything was sold secretly. The auction where slaves and magical bodies were sold was called Ananta. 3 years remained before the events of the novel began. Valita was glad that she had figured it out. In advance, Ananta would be coming soon, and she would have to go there. She decided to find out everything in advance. She was angry at those who fried a steak on her head and decided to go on reconnaissance and at the same time teach them a lesson. The first of the month arrived. Valita had a hard time finding regular clothes. Margaret helped her, teaching her table etiquette. The girl was in a hurry. Luckily, the map showed a secret passage that wasn't even in the book's plot. She was delighted. Secret passages are a convenient thing. Perhaps the imperial castle has the same. Valita arrived safely through the secret passage. She hid under a veil. Her goal was not participation, but penetration. She had neither an invitation nor money. She hoped that she would not meet anyone she knew there. Luther, in her opinion, is most likely being rejected by Margaret again, and there is no need to worry about him. With the rest, it was unclear. But Valita decided that she would have noticed them immediately. The auction began. The host explained that if you like the lot, you just need to raise the number you received at the entrance. The first lot is a strong male gladiator, a little over 20. He can be used in various ways. Slaves were considered objects here. They were given magical bracelets that exploded when they escaped. Escape was impossible. The price was 500,000 ilins. It was disgusting for Valite to hear this. After all, he was a man. The worst thing is that she arranged all this. Not only Ananta, but all this horror and the feelings of the slaves too. The auction continued, and she felt helpless. The host announced the last 8th lot. Valita had no right to turn away. The host said that this product was especially rare. They were caught with the help of a respected person. The last lot was 2 people at once. Valita did not understand why they were sold together. The curtain was raised. They were twins from the Tang clan, caught in the savannah. Their yellow-blue eyes confirmed their clan membership. Buyers wondered if magic had changed the twins' eyes, but some insisted they were real. Valita was shocked to hear about the Tang clan and knew that the big day had arrived. The Tang clan was considered a fearsome people in Savannah, and because of them, the area was a danger zone. They gave birth to children with yellow and blue eyes. These children had strength and became warriors. The game recalled such twins. Valita decided to forget about revenge on Carlon. Now, it was more important to save the twins, because according to the plot, they were connected with her death. In the game, the Tan twins were dead and were turned into a magical item that was given to the villain and became a weapon. This artifact destroyed the world, and Valita died. To prevent this, she must save them. Lot number 31 was valued at 500 million ilins, or about 500 million won. Valita thought the twins weren't cheap. She didn't know what to do because she came secretly and had no money or number. The screen reported about kidnapped people. If you free them, you can get assistance and open new plot lines. Valita didn't understand how this was possible, since the plot hadn't even started yet, and she wasn't even the main character. It was just a possibility of new branches, not a guarantee. Valita decided not to dwell on it. She had no choice. The stakes grew. First 1 million, then 1.5 million. Someone gave 4 million, then 12. Everyone turned around. It was Valita. She had a number and 70 million illions. Valita was shocked by the amount. 70 billion won. She suspected that the money was given for the completion of the task. This amount matched the sales volume of The Guardian's Garden. She understood why it was exactly that much. Now she has to spend them. She remembered how she was scolded for selling and grinned. The host repeated the bet of 12 million. Valita knew that even if they bought the twins, they would want to use them. This had to be stopped immediately. She thought of Carlin and spared no expense. Lot sold number 44. Valita became anxious. She did not understand why this particular numbers. In Vintage Alley, she asked the twins if there were any people nearby, but they just stared silently. Valita decided to gain trust. She cut her hand. Blood dripped onto the shackles, and they began to disappear. The shackles dissolved. Valita was glad that the Alden blood had been useful. She explained that she could remove the shackles, but before she could finish speaking, the twins grabbed her, smelling her scent. She smelled like a snake, like the one who caught them. One of them wanted to eat her. Valita realized that she had made a mistake. She had freed them, but now they were hostile. She didn't know how to prove that she wasn't guilty. She smiled and went into the inventory. She offered cake. The twins let her go and grabbed the food. It would have been better if she had meat. They asked what she would do with them. They found it hard to believe, and Valita needed meat. Valita explained that since she had freed them, she would not capture them. Even as slaves, they could kill her. Valita asks the twins to help save other people because they have abilities, but they refuse, considering her a stranger. Valita reminds them that she saved them and offers them a way to get rid of the shackles. She warns them to be careful so they don't get caught. Valita decides that all has been said, and the twins will not meet her again. But the connections to the new storylines remain unclear. A message appears. The kidnapped people have been released. Valita receives a reward, new assistants, and a chance to open a new plot. The former owner demands money for the escaped goods. The guy arguing with the auctioneer tells the owner that they have lost people. The owner asks who said that Vintage Street is blocked and scolds the guy for being useless. He apologizes. The guy continues to apologize, and the owner, Noah Elsius, comments that he doesn't remember getting a parrot. Noah Elsius bought the twins, then disappeared. The owner orders to keep an eye on him, especially his head and tail. The owner is sorry that he was not able to meet the person who bought the twins. He is very interested in this person. Valita is not feeling well. She dreamed about Noah all night. Of the 4 main characters, 2 are normal and 2 are not. Noah Elsius is an archmage attractive, and with the title of Duke, he creates the image of an ideal groom. Noah has imprisoned Margaret. Valita is afraid to run into him on Ananta, but is glad that he did not. Valita hears screams. The man does not understand how the slaves escaped. He is indignant that now they will stop being afraid of them. The man sends his subordinate away, calls him an idiot, and Valita feels relieved to see how difficult it is for him. The task is accomplished, and the twins have fulfilled the request. The screams of their father calm Valita. Luther bursts into the room. Valita asks if he was taught to knock, and he wonders why she is calm. Valita jokes that she's ready to blow out candles because Luther is in trouble, or even put a stake on his head. Luther is angry, and Valita says that he is naive because he himself broke into her room. Luther asks if Valita called him Margaret's nickname. Valita confirms, but says it's unpleasant. He must try and avoid mistakes, otherwise she will get it. Luther is defeated, and Valita warns him not to harm Margaret. She is shocked to see the twins in the window. Valita sends Luther away, asking him not to harm Margaret by ruining her appetite. Luther notices her strange behavior. The lady lets the twins in and asks how they found her. They are silent, and she doesn't understand what the problem is. One of the twins says, "Meat!" and Valita realizes that they are reproaching her for eating without them. Valita takes out the meat from the inventory, and the twins' expressions change. She notices that the Tang clan resembles dogs. She thanks the twins for fulfilling her request. The girl is surprised how she knows and asks if she really is a magician. The girl asks if they were following her. The guy replies that they are allowed to do that, and she confirms that she did not notice them. Valita says she is not a mage and asks if they feel power from her. They confirm but cannot explain her actions. Valita is surprised how the twins followed her and freed the people calling her a fool. It's strange for them. The girl warned that if she was called a fool again, there would be no meat. The twins immediately apologized, admitting their mistake. Valita said it was hard to explain her abilities, especially before they left. They wouldn't meet again. The twins say they won't go back to Savannah, but will stay here. Valita is shocked, but they are confident they won't be caught. The twins decided to kill the one who caught them, but Valita forbade it. They laugh, asking why she smiles and does not restrain herself. The girl asked if Valita would be happy if they killed her father. She replied that she could not be happy about the death of a loved one. The twins demanded meat. Valita explained that she could not allow them to kill Carlon because she still needed him even if he was a villain. Although Carlon is a villain, Valita admits that she made him that way. If the twins kill him, it will be revenge, but she does not want that. The twins said they wouldn't kill. Valita was surprised and asked why she said he was needed. The twins wanted to protect her because she was interesting to them. They told her that the only way to save the Tang clan was for the Tang clan itself. Valita shed blood for them, and the twins became interested in her identity. Now they want to know more about her and her destiny. Valita learned their names, Rachel and Roxa. She introduced herself and hoped that they would get along. Roxa said she should hope so, and Rachel added that they would bend over backwards to protect such a fragile girl. Valita knew she had to endure it because she was wrong. She decided to ask the twins for help. Rachel asked if she would die if they did not fulfill her request. Valita replied that nothing good would happen. Valita has tasked them with finding a man named Austin Hill. He can save her life. 4 days later, a bag containing a chart appeared in Valita's room. It stated that she would meet Austin Hill. Austin Hill became the commander-in-chief of an aristocratic house, which increased his status. He was a welcome ally. He later became a high-ranking official, helping the heroes defeat the villain. Many families wanted him on their side. The sign asked if Valita wanted to continue. She realized that he had most likely been kidnapped, and she didn't yet know what would happen next. Valita was disappointed because she asked them to bring him normally. Now they kidnapped him, but they look as if they expect praise. Valita nevertheless praised them, calling them good fellows. They received a reward: meat. Valita asked if Austin was okay. He replied that he didn't look like he was okay. Austin was scared and asked what she was going to do with him. Valita explained that it was a misunderstanding. Valita clarified that she did not kidnap him for his body and that she was not the twins' owner. The main character asked about the twins' behavior. Austin assumed that it was an order from the snake's cunning owner. The twins continued to ask for meat. Valita praised Austin for his guess, noting that the snake does not trust anyone. Not even its young Austin confirmed that the snake is cunning. Austin noted that the snake's daughter was very different from what was said about her. The main character admitted that he was observant and well-informed about Valita. Valita agreed that the snake did not trust its young. She suggested that they think about another situation, and Austin asked about her deceptions. Valita didn't like Austin's comment. He said that baby snakes were different, which could explain the success of the Alden clan. Valita added that they had an example to follow. Valita asked if it was strange that snakes dreamed of leaving their lair. Alden asked if she was planning to separate from their kind. The main character replied that she was planning to do this later and that she needed Austin to achieve her goals, although the method was crude. Austin was dumbfounded. He had been kidnapped, and now they were hiring him. Valita reminded him that she was still one of the Aldens. Valita compared herself to a snake that sheds its skin but remains a snake. She spoke of escaping to Ananta and the birth of the Tan twins. Austin was surprised by her openness. Valita said that she saw no point in hiding it, since he already understood everything. Valita promised to break out because she had a goal. She needed Austin to reduce the risks and was willing to take a loss. Austin asked if he was her loss. The main character said that if Austin didn't want to be her loss, he should try. Austin was shocked because he hadn't agreed to work for her yet. Valita asked him what was wrong with him, whether she was not satisfying his demands. She assured him that she would be able to achieve her goal. Austin looked at her, and Valita asked him what salary he wanted. This surprised him greatly. Valita said she paid $12 million for the Tan twins and offered Austin 10,000 Illion to start with. In addition, she offered an advance of 100,000 Illion bonuses, incentives, and salary increases as the contract continued. Austin agreed to Valita's proposal, promising to try. She was delighted and ordered to call her the head. Austin agreed, although many families wanted to get him. Graham Cordis appeared on the training field of the knightly order he was called, and he approached, knowing who was waiting for him. Graham asked how Count Ellen became a knight with that expression on his face. Ellen said it was important to comfort a friend, not a face. Graham didn't care if he was crying. Ellen asked Graham what was more important to him, a friend or his reputation. Graham replied that it was his reputation, and then joked about the lady possibly refusing him. Ellen was angry and reported that Austin Hill had disappeared. Graham was shocked, asking if Austin was the one he wanted to hire. Ellen said he had been preparing the money for Austin, but someone had beaten him to it. Graham didn't know who might have poached him. The guy didn't understand how Austin could be hired, but Graham replied that whoever got it first got it. Ellen was outraged and doubted Graham's side. Graham was on the side of the one with more money, and Austin probably was too. Ellen was complaining about a world ruled by money, and how those who don't have it live. The knight told Ellen that he could not speak like that given his earldom. Graham wondered who could have hired Austin. Margaret noticed that Valita looked pale, worried about her friend. Valita explained that it was not because of her father or Luther. Valita realized that her serious demeanor might give cause for concern. She insisted that everything was fine, and that she was not interested in her father or Luther. She asked Margaret not to worry, as she was doing well, and had no interest in them. Margaret said that she would like to be Valita's sister. Valita replied that she was already like a sister, and suggested calling her that. Margaret was surprised, and Valita wondered if she wanted to be her sister. Margaret realized it was a joke, and asked him to stop. Valita asked why she was the elder sister if they were the same age. She agreed to be the elder sister if Valita wanted. Valita found it funny how Margaret wanted to be the older sister. Margaret decided to be the younger one, agreeing with this. Valita asked if Luther had been pestering Margaret. She replied that he had become less insistent and suggested that he was busy. Valita believed that Luther was courting Margaret, but the Carlons would not accept her because of her poverty. She had to act quickly. Valita said she would solve the problem. Margaret tried to dissuade her, but Valita assured her that everything would be fine. Margaret hugged Valita, wanting her to be happy. Valita would do anything to save her friend from her bad fate. Margaret promised to return. Valita warned her to be careful. Austin asked if her goal was really to make Margaret happy. Valita confirmed that Margaret was nice. Austin was worried about Luther, but Valita wanted to find a protector for her friend. Valita smiled and said she was looking for a man to spite Luther. She thought it was natural. Prince Kyle and Graham were potential protectors of Margaret. Valita was ready to help her friend if she was interested in one of them. If Margaret liked one of them, Valita would catch it and give it to her. Austin did not know what the mistress had in mind. Valita said she hadn't planned anything. She was just thinking about what kind of men Margaret would like. She was prepared to find a solution if it didn't work out. Valita believed that there was no need to adjust to a certain ending because she herself was the designer of events. She could become Margaret's protector. Valita added that she and Austin have 4 years, 3 before the story begins, and a year to prepare. Everything could change with her interventions. Valita decided to play along, relying on Austin. She promised to give him a job and not disappoint him. Austin joked that he had a nut for a head like Valita. He promised to do everything in his power. Roxa and Rachel were to stay close and keep an eye on safety. If they left, a note was to be left. Valita asked everyone to help. 4 years passed quickly, and everyone began to follow her plan. In Galen's alley, everyone was happy to see Valita back. She wondered why they were waiting for her since Austin was in charge of them. Her subordinates said they simply missed her. In 3 years, Valita had built a team, earned money, and created capital. Valita directed the course of business, and Austin handled other tasks, but everyone always wanted the mistress. She did not interact closely with her subordinates, except for Chaunt. The girl asked the lady why she had ordered these weeds to be collected. Valita saw Lurup for the first time, and noticed that the girl had collected a lot of grass. The girl explained that there was a lot of grass. Not a little. Valita replied that even if she explained, not everyone would understand, and that she simply had to carry out the order. Valita praised everyone and noted that it was time to leave. Everyone was upset, and the girl said goodbye. The lady had worries and expectations, and a new chapter of her life began. In the Flame Trade Guild office, Margaret was worried about the large losses due to the slow pace of work. The girl asked if this was a serious problem. Margaret explained that the orders came from the Aldens, but it still required a lot of money. Margaret was afraid that if things continued like this, they might go broke. The maid suggested that she meet Lady Valita for dinner. Margaret agreed because communication with Valita always inspired her. The maid was pleased to see their strong friendship, and the girl was embarrassed. Suddenly, a servant ran in and said that a man from the cedar clan had arrived. Margaret was surprised and asked if there was an urgent matter. Margaret realized that this was the mysterious clan, and the servant confirmed it. The man wanted to see her, not her father. She was surprised. The servant said that the father had entrusted this matter to his daughter. Margaret decided to meet the guest and asked to bring him. The guest greeted Margaret with respect. He introduced himself and asked if she had bought a white cat with one eye at the auction. Lucille offered to buy a cat. Margaret noticed that his character and appearance were unusual and asked the reason for his visit. Lucille asked to buy the cat and offered to exchange it for something valuable. Margaret confirmed the purchase, and he placed a mysterious box on the table. When Margaret opened the box, she saw the Cedar clan amulet. This stone was considered mysterious and valuable. The amulet was a treasure revered by the Cedar clan. Rumors said that its owner would always be rich and respected. 100 years ago, Emperor Astatia ruled successfully after receiving this amulet from the Cedar clan. Lucille offered it for a cat which seemed strange. Margaret bought the cat cheaply. She noticed that the figurine was really beautiful and probably very important to Lucille. Lucille did not understand her words, thinking that she was trying to increase the price. But Margaret said that she did not need a talisman. Margaret offered to simply give the cat away if it was so important to Lucille. He was surprised, and she was happy to meet a representative of the clan. Margaret smiled and said that her decision was to give the cat away. She asked to keep an eye on her and not lose her. Lucille said that Margaret was an amazing person and gave her a talisman that he was going to give to her regardless of her reaction. Lucille asked her not to refuse the gift, believing that she deserved it. Margaret was surprised and asked what the right to the amulet meant. The man said she would find out in time. He went outside and started talking to the cat statue, promising to trust Magnus again. Valita passed by, and Lucille thought that it was a strange girl heading towards the new owner of the amulet, which caught his attention. Lucille decided to stay in the Empire because the game Garden of Guardians began, and it all started with Margaret becoming the owner of the amulet. Valita was surprised to learn that Margaret had received the Cedar clan's amulet. She was touched to see how excited Margaret was. Margaret invited Valita to examine the amulet, surprising her with the fact that she was wearing the treasure of the continent as if it were just a small change. Margaret wanted to return the amulet, but the owner refused, and she decided to keep it, considering it her destiny, since it is beautiful. The amulet glows in the hands of a just man, and only Margaret could possess it. She felt her heart overflowing with something. The girl smiled, admiring the beauty of the amulet. Margaret decided to give it to Valita, not understanding how it happened. Margaret tried to explain that this was too much for a gift, but she didn't want to listen, claiming that the girl deserved such a gift. Valita was reluctant, but agreed, warning that it was a gift from a distant friend, and that the amulet was called the Eye of the Typhoon. Valita loved such gifts, and Margaret agreed, deciding not to be upset. Valita congratulated her on her new amulet. The girl hoped that with the amulet, Margaret's life would become calmer, and she would always help, because for this, she had been preparing her for 3 years. The maid admired Valita's performance and felt offended, not understanding why it offended her, because she should be proud of her mistress. The assistant agreed to this, since the lady had chosen her a former mercenary. She asked when Valita would go to the branch as requested by the deputy. Valita was surprised and replied that she had already been there. The maid assumed that the deputy wanted to deliver something personally. The maid advised them to go as soon as possible because there was a lot of work and everyone was exhausted. Valita did not understand the problem. The girl asked the maid to stay with Margaret until she returned. But after dinner, Austin was surprised at how much weight the master had lost. Austin didn't like her appearance and offered to take on some of the work if she liked her thinness. Margaret refused. Margaret suggested that Austin move to the Alden estate if he was having trouble working. He promised to fulfill his duties. Valita asked the reason for the call. Austin said there were questions that needed the head's signature. Austin said that Lurup had prepared a warehouse for the herbs, but if there was more, the herbs might rot. He suggested starting to grow them. Valita was surprised because she didn't think that a weed could be grown. Austin said, "Girl, it grows quickly, and that's its advantage." Austin suggested buying the land and testing it out. Valita was interested in the idea because it would not affect the finances. Valita has instructed Austin to buy land in the outback and to entrust the work only to reliable people. He also needs to keep an eye out for suspicious activity in the Andra Guild. Andra Guild is a large criminal organization that makes money from illegal activities. Crimes are more common than before. The girl noticed in the documents that the Andra Guild was engaged in the trade of prohibited goods and gave a bribe to the head of the border guard. Austin reported that they had bribed the border guard more than the Andra Guild and retrieved the report. Valita praised him for his success in the investigation. Austin joked that he would become the worst scum. He believed that their actions were legal and that bribes helped solve crimes and improve the future. The girl decided that it was time to stop the investigation because they had already collected all the necessary information. They had to break ties with Andra before it was too late. The deputy admitted that his mistress was being cruel, but Valita replied that it was necessary. She asked for the information to be completed and left. As they parted, the deputy warned Valita to be careful. The team was upset that she was leaving, and the deputy was the only one who spoke to her alone. Austin noted that anyone who wanted to speak to the lady had to take their place. Valita could not get used to this order. Valita felt she was late, and Luther was keeping a close eye on her. She left Jill with Margaret to avoid Luther's pestering. The girl was angry with herself for creating Luther, but her family also threatened her. Her father threatened to throw her out, and her mother screamed at her to stay out of sight. Luther scolded Valita for her stupidity, and the family continued to threaten her. She believed that the threats were unrealistic since her life was safe. Valita thought they were still angry that she had interfered with their business in Ananta. That was 3 years ago when she had saved the twins. The Ananta auction was closed, and the Aldens lost their source of income. Their family situation worsened. Now it was time to act on Antana. Wellite felt the alley was safer than the Alden family, although it was far less significant. Suddenly, she saw a man. She assumed he was dead because the alley was dark and dangerous, with robberies and murders common there, and it shocked her. When Valita noticed that the man was alive, she calmed down and promised to help him, saying that he needed to be patient for a little while. "Girl." The man suggested that the girl pretend that she had not seen anything. Valita realized that Noah Elsius was in front of her, but she was too shocked to speak. Valita asked why Noah was there, but he only laughed, realizing that she knew him. He wondered what to do next in this situation. Noah was the greatest magician, but what happened to him surprised Valita. He was poisoned, and the color of his blood confirmed it, but the novel did not explain why. Noah joked that her gaze could not take its eyes off his condition. Valita was confused, but thought that her appearance could be connected with this. Valita decided to help and threw Noah an antidote, but he was not pleased with this gesture. His face showed that he did not expect such help. Noah did not appreciate the antidote as charity. He laughed and asked if Valita wanted to die, thinking that she had given him help out of pity. Valita was frightened and explained that she was simply afraid to get too close. It was just a gesture of help, not an act of mercy. Noah continued that her help was charity and that her knowledge of him was surprising. Valita decided to pretend she didn't know who he was. The girl said she just wanted to help a dying man. Noah was amazed that she was willing to sacrifice a valuable item for the sake of someone else's life, considering her help a divine act. Valita turned away and suggested that the help be considered as the descent of an angel, but Noah did not let her go, asking where she was going, threatening to tear out her wings. Valita was frightened and stopped hoping that he would not break her legs. She stated that if she was not on the ground, her wings would allow her to fly. The girl ran calling Rachel. He picked her up and they started to walk away. Rachel asked if it was necessary to kill the man. Valita in Rachel's arms praised him, thinking that he might attack Noah, but he sat quietly in the shadows, not reacting. Rachel and Roxa always followed Valita, even when they had business to attend to. One of the twins always stayed close by guarding her. Rachel said he would have attacked Noah if he had threatened Valita. He acknowledged that Noah was strong and suggested that it would be better to kill him now than to suffer later. The girl thought that he felt Noah's power. Rachel promised that, together with Roxa, they would be able to defeat him, but Valita did not want to get involved with him anymore. The protagonist encountered the poisoned Noah Elsius in an alley and fulfilled the conditions for the hidden ending, opening a new path that will help to find out his end. Valita didn't understand the hidden ending and what it meant. A button appeared to view Noah Elsius's path, and the user's choice could lead to this ending. While Valita was trying to understand the situation, information came that kidnapped people were found at Ananta's auction. By freeing them, she will gain new allies and new storylines. The girl thought that the new path was connected with the auction. In the morning, the twins noticed changes in her Roxa, thought that the lady had fallen ill with something serious. Rachel was surprised, and Roxa remembered that Valita had said that strange symptoms were a bad disease, but she meant the saying that strange behavior was associated with death. The twins didn't believe that Valita would die soon. She had worked for 3 years for a good ending, and now Noah had appeared, which made it difficult to start the main plot. Noah kidnapped Margaret and held her captive. The twins discussed what could have caused Valita's illness. Rachel suggested killing Noah, but Valita would not allow it. The girl called Rachel and Roxa. They quickly renounced their thoughts of murder. She hugged them, feeling support, and realized that she did not worry with such allies. Valita doesn't regret saving the twins. It was enough for her, even if it meant following Noah's path. The servants found Noah in shock. Norton asked what the master had in his hands. Noah promised to explain later, but first they needed to go to the estate to find out something. Norton said he had checked the information Noah had asked for. He said it was an expensive antidote, suggesting the gentleman drink at least a little. Noah drank some of the antidote and left the bottle on the table. Norton asked if he would finish it, but Noah replied that he regretted drinking it because it was proof of the first benefactor. The servant said that the antidote was of high quality, and it was possible to find out that it could have been made by Blame or the Aldens. Noah was surprised that it could be the Aldens. He decided to check them separately, not allowing the reptiles to look at the sky. Noah asked about the surveillance. Norton apologized, saying it was difficult because she had accomplices who covered their tracks. Noah was disappointed with the outcome. Noah wondered who was behind the surveillance. He decided that the more difficult the case, the more fun it would be to break wings. It was becoming more and more exciting for him. Noah was happy that he could now get Margaret. A spy in the guild sent a letter saying that Plum Branches was Margaret. The description, white flowers with purple stamens, indicated a person from Cedar, and black honey meant a talisman from that clan passed on to Margaret. Usually, Valita would come to see Margaret, and they would talk about marriage proposals, but this was something else entirely. If Margaret became the mistress of the amulet, her father would recognize her and allow her engagement to Luther. Luther informed his father that Margaret was now the mistress, which outraged him. Luther said that a man from the Cedar clan gave Margaret the amulet. The father doubted it, but the son assured him that he was not lying. Luther said that Valita knew about it too. He overheard their conversation about Margaret and the amulet. Father lost his temper. Luther suggested reproaching Valita, but the main thing was to find the amulet. Valita would not escape punishment. Father admitted that he thought Margaret was stupid, but she turned out to be smart. Luther offered to make her part of the Alden family in order to get the amulet. The father agreed, but said that he needed to think about it. Luther left, and the father noted that his son was a complete idiot. Father does not agree with the marriage, even if the amulet is important to Carlin. He would marry her to one of his useless sons. The man decided not to marry her, but simply to take the amulet. If she understood everything, Carlin would show generosity. He ordered the carriage to be prepared. Carlin went to the palace and bowed to the emperor. He was surprised by his visit. There was no apology. Orlando Lucius, the emperor, said that the important thing was that Carlin always brought joy with his visits. He asked what had happened. Carlin said that he was helping the Viscount's guild, and rumors about Cedar's amulet brought him here. The emperor was surprised and asked again that it was about the cedar amulet Carlon confirmed, and added that the amulet had ended up in their hands, and he wanted to pass it on. The man said that if Carlon brought the amulet, it would help secure his monopoly on the trade in magical items. At the manor, Valita laughed happy that Luther and Carlon had gone to the castle. She was proud of her fight against Ananta. Rachel was surprised that they didn't have to interfere. Valita was going to tell everything, and she didn't care. Valita thought that Carlon went to the palace to tell about the amulet. This could have changed the plot significantly, which was not beneficial for the main character. It was important to Valita and her team that Carlon got into the castle, because that was the goal of their efforts. The twins realized that Valita was restricting Ananta, not only because of her own desires, but also to prevent more victims. However, she had an even more important goal that she was trying to achieve. The emperor was surprised by the unexpected appearance of the amulet and realized that serious problems could arise if he transferred the right to trade in magical goods to other people. Kyle Lucius, the crown prince of the empire, came to the discussion and noted that this man was clearly an outlier. He emphasized that this moment required special attention and careful investigation. The father, hearing his son's words, asked if he knew all the circumstances. The prince confirmed that he was following the events in the Alden family and noted that he was surprised by the appearance of the amulet. Kyle was surprised that his father knew about such details. The prince expressed a desire to hide these things in a safe place such as hell, so that no one could find them and use them against them. The emperor understood his son's proposal, but noted that the Aldens were necessary for the imperial family. Kyle, in turn, stated that they were only necessary for him, and therefore he turned a blind eye to Anana's actions in order to preserve them. Kyle declared that under his rule, the Aldens and Ananta would be sent to hell, and that it was not worth giving them the right to trade. The emperor called him a fool. The emperor explained that the amulet could not be left with Kyle, as it was not just an object, but a symbol of wealth and glory. Kyle suggested returning the amulet to the Viscount's family, assuming that the Aldens had already given it to them. He believed that they could not know this in advance. Kyle promised to find out the details. His father, thinking him a fool, said he would take power from him if he failed to handle the matter. With a smile on his face, Kyle Lucius confidently stated that it was time for the emperor to prepare to hand over his powers. His father could not understand how his son had become like this, but Kyle simply explained that it was all his fault. Kyle Lucius was the next person that Valita sought to build a relationship with, but he was also the one who was determined to get rid of all the Aldens in order to establish his own power. Margaret couldn't contain her delight. She was happy, but at the same time, at some point she remained in silence, unable to find words to express her feelings. Valita noticed this place, but she had never heard of it. Margaret didn't immediately understand why they were there. Valita, without wasting time, replied that they had come to buy new clothes, but Margaret, still perplexed, reminded them of the dresses she already had. Valita smiled and suggested that Margaret choose a dress for herself and called the saleswomen. They, having learned what the ladies were looking for, began to show several models. However, Valita was not satisfied with the options presented, deciding to order something custom. The saleswoman, seeing that the order had been accepted, was delighted and asked if there would be a dress for Valita herself. She received the answer that Valita would choose a ready-made product, but for Margaret, a new one would need to be made to order. Margaret was so surprised that she could not contain her delight and cried out in surprise. The saleswoman ran to get the material, but Valita stopped her, saying that she preferred to choose the fabric for the dress herself. Margaret was surprised and asked why her friend needed a new dress. Valita replied that she just wanted to give her a present. Margaret agreed, but a custom dress seemed too much. Valita took her friend by the hands and explained how important it was to please loved ones with gifts. She asked if Margaret didn't want to let her do that. Margaret threw herself into his arms, saying she didn't know Valita asked to see the material and lace. She wanted to choose everything herself. As Margaret said goodbye, she was worried that Valita had spent too much. Valita asked if her friend liked her choice. Margaret replied that she liked everything, but that Valita had chosen a bright dress for her, but not for herself. She offered to pay, but Valita refused. Valita noticed that Margaret was becoming nicer and nicer, but this time she couldn't accept her offer. Valita said it too loudly, and Margaret surprised her with her answer. Ronald E. Bowden Viscount was at the Flame Trade Guild. Margaret approached him and asked why he was walking around in front of the building. Ronald was surprised by her appearance. Ronald suggested that they talk to their daughter in his office. He wanted to discuss something urgent, and if Valita didn't mind, he wanted to invite her too. Ronald led them all into a spacious office where there was a round table covered with green cloth. They sat around it as if it were a business meeting. Margaret, trying to hide her growing excitement, cautiously turned to her father, asking whether there really was a letter on the table in front of them that had been sent from the imperial palace itself. The father nodded calmly, confirming that the envelope was addressed specifically to him. He had the right to open it and examine the contents. The letter clearly stated that the amulet was already in Margaret's hands. The girl, visibly worried, asked again if there was anything more significant in the letter. Besides information about the transfer of the amulet, she was tormented by the thought that the document could contain threats. Then the father, without losing his composure, replied that she herself should understand what it was about if she read the lines carefully. The hints were obvious, if of course you knew what exactly they meant. He added that he had complete confidence in Miss Valita, so he sincerely hoped that she would not doubt his words and actions. Everything he said came from the heart. The lady, a little surprised by such a statement, calmed him down in a reserved manner. She assured him that Vika was not here by chance, and that she trusted both him and Margaret herself, having no doubts about their intentions. The father who raised Margaret was known in the game as an example of integrity. He was a man who always tried to do the right thing, was kind and caring. His sincerity made him trustworthy without question. At that moment, Valita, clearly worried about the situation, decided to ask a frank question, not hiding her excitement. She asked what was hidden behind this mysterious imperial message and what it meant for her. Ronald replied that the letter contained an official invitation. The senders of the letter wanted the owner of the black stone, that is Valita herself, to visit them. This invitation was important and had great significance for her future. The letter also stated that the carriage would arrive in exactly 2 days. Everything had been carefully coordinated, and the time of arrival was strictly defined without the slightest deviation from the plan. Additionally, there was a strange phrase in the letter that made one think they hoped that the snake would not bite them when they were backing away and accidentally stepped on its tail, which sounded like a warning. Valita took these words with a cool composure, not showing any excitement, but Margaret immediately turned pale. There was obvious fear in her eyes. She felt that the situation was serious. Margaret immediately understood the essence of the hint. Her father already knew exactly about the true nature of the amulet and who exactly was wearing it. It was a terrible discovery that did not bode well. She was completely confused. She couldn't understand when her father had managed to find out everything. He always seemed to her a mean, cunning person who could eavesdrop or reveal secrets at any moment. He said that if she wanted to avoid trouble and keep the peace of the family, she needed to accept this invitation. Otherwise, the situation could get worse, and the consequences would be dire for everyone. So she noted that, in her opinion, they should accept the invitation, including, for the sake of Margaret herself, the real owner of the stone, because it was logical. Even if they try to hide or change their appearance, the emperor will still expose them. He is too smart and observant not to guess. The man wanted to object, but Valita spoke first. She made it clear that she understood his concern. After all, he was worried about his daughter. But in the end, he himself knows what to choose: a snake or a bird of prey. Sometimes you have to decide who is more dangerous, but also more profitable to deal with. 2 days later, they set off. Margaret was beaming with joy, excited, and made no secret of the fact that she was delighted with the trip. Valita, seeing how Margaret was gradually approaching her goal, noticed her confusion. The girl was beginning to worry, tormented by doubts. She could not understand for sure whether she would cope with the upcoming tests. Valita tried to console her, assuring her that everything would be fine. She emphasized that Margaret was capable of many things, but deep down, Margaret was still worried about how she would behave around the prince. Margaret was worried about the fact that the slightest mistake could lead to catastrophic consequences. This fear did not leave her. It seemed to fetter her mind, not allowing her to focus on important things. Seeing her state, Valita took her hand. She spoke confidently, stating that Margaret was not to blame for the situation, and she should not let fear control her. All that mattered was her own calm. Valita advised the girl to straighten her back and not be afraid to directly state her position. It is important not to hide behind other people's words, but to be honest and decisive in your actions, despite the outside world. She added that Margaret should not pay attention to the opinions of others. She should follow her heart, because it will always tell her how to do the right thing without looking back at the doubts and opinions of others. These words of Valita had some effect on Margaret. Her tension eased slightly, and she felt the weight that had been pressing on her shoulders ease a little, giving a feeling of relief. Thanks to Valita, Margaret felt as if a flame had lit up in her chest. Now she no longer doubted herself, and her confidence filled her steps. Margaret went forward, full of determination, and Valita, smiling softly, said that she would wait for her in the cafe as soon as she had completed her task. If Margaret could really cope with the current tasks, then a whole series of meetings responsibilities and new challenges awaited her. There would be so much to do that there would not be enough time, but she felt that she was ready for it. In the game's storyline, the prince was never portrayed as a villain. However, in this new world, where everyone has their own feelings and free will, it is difficult to predict how Margaret will behave around him. All this was still unknown to her. Even if they were destined to be together, she could not allow the prince to lead her. This would be a completely wrong move that would disrupt her own path and fundamentally change her life guidelines. Valita made a decision. If the prince began to put even the slightest pressure on Margaret, she would not hesitate to break off this relationship. In this way, she could maintain her independence and leadership in their relationship without losing control. Valita considered for a few minutes whether she should try to find other suitors for Margaret's heart. Perhaps that would give her the opportunity to choose and feel real freedom in her choice. She was ready to do anything for Margaret. She became very important to her, and Valita believed that her ward deserved only the best conditions and people around her. Margaret felt something dangerous approaching, as if she were walking towards a snake that was about to strike. This feeling grew stronger, and it seemed to her that this was no accident. At such a moment, if one showed weakness, all might be lost. So Margaret tried to remain cool and attentive, so as not to fall into the trap of her emotions. The butler had already managed to warn the prince about the arrival of the lady. He was ready to meet her, and was waiting for her arrival, having prepared everything for this important meeting in his private chambers. The prince greeted Margaret with a joyful expression on his face. His voice was warm, and his gaze was full of interest and attentiveness, which immediately created a feeling of goodwill. Prince Kyle Lucius introduced himself and politely gestured to the chair opposite, inviting Margaret to sit and not feel constrained. His manner was polite and calm, making it clear that she was a welcome guest. The prince admitted that he expected to see the Viscount. After all, according to rumors, the amulet belonged to a man, and therefore he was surprised by what was happening. But it turned out that the owner of the artifact was the heiress, and this was an unexpected but clearly pleasant discovery for the prince. The lady noted with a slight smile that his assumption was quite logical, since the head of their clan was her father, and all actions, including those related to protection, went through him. The prince noted with restraint that the girl was very modest, and that was captivating. She lowered her gaze slightly mentally, thanking him for his kind words, trying to hide her awkwardness. The Alden clan had long been under the protection of the Aldens, and he had heard that Alden's own daughter got along well with Carlin's daughter, which brought their clans closer together and made the alliance stronger. She was rumored to be a kind, reserved, and well-mannered girl. Perhaps it was his own prejudices that prevented him from looking at her without prejudice. Suddenly, he asked how he could be sure of her words, because theoretically, she could be lying, and he had no way to verify the truth regarding the amulet. The girl regretfully apologized to him, explaining that she also had no way to prove her involvement, and this made the situation difficult. The amulet did not have her name engraved on it, nor any other marks that could confirm that it belonged to her. The prince was surprised by this fact, because he expected some proof. But the girl explained that she was not the only one who could touch this artifact. Then Margaret herself began to think about how to prove she was right, if everything was so vague and no one could give a precise answer or explanation? Kyle was completely confused, not understanding why she was even asking him questions like that, as if she was seeking his permission to tell her own truth. But really, there was no reliable way to prove it. No spells, no seals, no ancient words that could confirm her belonging to the amulet. Kyle was amazed that she hadn't even thought about it beforehand. As they walked there, he became increasingly irritated by her carelessness and nonchalance in such matters. Then the girl, a little embarrassed, apologized. She said that he himself simply mentioned that he wanted to see the owner of the amulet, and she decided that this would be quite enough. The man was even slightly taken aback by how seriously she took the situation. He felt uncomfortable. He himself had long forgotten about his own desire. Then he simply asked her to explain how exactly she had gotten the amulet. The girl immediately realized that she should not talk about that strange cat statue under any circumstances. So she calmly lied that one day a man from the Cedar clan came to see her, and it was he who gave her the amulet. The prince was surprised. Is that really all? In addition, he admitted that he wanted to give her this item from the very beginning. According to him, she really deserved it, and he did not regret his decision for a moment. The man thought about it. After all, the amulet was a family heirloom passed down only within the imperial family. But now, for the first time in 100 years, it had found a new owner. The prince asked if she had taken it with her. When she confirmed, he asked to show it. The girl carefully took the amulet out of the basket, feeling a slight tension. He looked down and saw that she had simply slipped the amulet into her pocket. He froze in amazement. Was that all she had done? This behavior seemed almost shocking to him. The girl calmly explained that pockets were actually needed for that very purpose, to put things in them. The prince's surprise only increased. He could not believe her simplicity. He noted to himself that perhaps only such straightforward and slightly strange people could really possess such powerful amulets. After a short pause, he said that he wanted to ask her one important question, and his gaze became more serious, as if the decision had already been made. The prince asked her if she had even the slightest desire to pass this amulet on to someone else, perhaps as a gift. For example, he suggested that she think about it. What if she presented this valuable amulet to the imperial family, and not to the Marquis of Alden, as was perhaps planned? The girl was confused and seemed genuinely shocked. Then the prince realized that she apparently had no idea that Marquis Alden was going to give the amulet to the emperor. It was supposed to be an exchange, a gift of a powerful magical item, and in return full rights to trade magical goods throughout the empire. After this, the prince asked what she thought about this, whether she was ready to take part in such a proposal. He asked if she would like to give the amulet to the imperial family, and thereby receive support from Marquis Alden to raise her position. The girl was at a loss for words. It was as if she had lost the confidence she had been full of before, not knowing what to say now or how to act correctly. The prince thought that her confidence seemed to have evaporated. This meant that it would be easier to persuade her than he expected. But perhaps it would be worth approaching from another direction, through her friend. He remembered that the girl had a friend from the Alden family. Then he asked if she was ready to sacrifice the amulet for the sake of this friend. And then Valita came to Margaret's mind. She had done nothing bad to her, and Margaret understood. You shouldn't make decisions based on others. You should follow your heart. Her friend had said these words to her, before calling Margaret not just her favorite heroine, but her true value, like someone she was afraid of losing. Then, Margaret confidently stated that she did not agree. After all, she herself was the owner of the amulet, which meant that only she could decide what to do with it and who had access to it. She also emphasized that Marquis Alden has no right to dispose of the amulet without her consent, since he has neither a moral nor a formal right to do so. But with this approach, her friend, who also belongs to the Alden house, may have difficulties and unnecessary suspicions from their circle. Despite this, Margaret assured that the girl would support her. Whatever she decided, her friend would stay on her side and would not betray her. After all, she always supports Valita in return, regardless of the circumstances, thereby demonstrating their deep connection and loyalty. The prince finally understood. His friend was not a pretext for handing over the amulet to the Aldens. On the contrary, she became the support that allowed Margaret not to give in. It was the support that allowed her to go against expectations. He was surprised that such a kind girl could become friends with Alden's daughter. He thought it was all funny, and he really liked the choice Margaret made, because it turned out to be much braver than it seemed. He also came to the conclusion that perhaps the lady was not going to do what was expected of her at all, but wanted to do things her own way. He wondered if she was planning to set a trap for that impudent and unpleasant Marquis of Alden to put him in his place. At this time, Valita was sitting in the cafe garden. She was patiently waiting for her friend, with whom she had agreed to meet here in this cozy place. She thought that Margaret should have returned by now, and she was slightly worried that something might have happened on the way, or in the conversation with those who could interfere. Valita suddenly looked away from her book and noticed a carriage stop outside the mansion. When the door opened, Margaret stepped out gracefully, confidently, and gracefully. A minute later, she heard a surprised hum. Servants and passers-by began to whisper. The imperial carriage had arrived in the city, but no one recognized the girl in it. Everyone looked at her with admiration, so refined and elegant, clearly of noble origin. And all this increased the mystery of her appearance in such a magnificent carriage. Margaret, beaming with joy, came forward, waved her hand lightly, and called out to Valita, as if there was no rank or ceremony between them, only friendship. Valita couldn't help but smile, and asked curiously how her trip had gone, while jokingly calling her Mrs. Rabbit, teasing her old friend. Margaret snorted in response, and said that she was not a rabbit at all, and Valita, still smiling, assured her that she was just joking and did not mean anything bad. In another, less visible carriage, Noah Elsius was sitting at the same time. His gaze was directed forward, but at some point, he suddenly became animated. He leaned forward slightly and ordered the coachman to stop right there, without giving any reason, but in such a tone that the latter did not dare to object. Everything changed the moment he saw two girls at the entrance, especially the one in the light dress who was laughing and talking animatedly. He suddenly realized that he had urgent business nearby, and decided that it was worth staying. His gaze did not leave the girls for a second. Meanwhile, Margaret sighed quietly and admitted that she was a little upset. She wished her friend had been with her at the reception. She still remembered the aromatic tea and soft cookies that were served to her. It would be so nice if her friend could try it too. Valita was surprised that her friend had already thought everything through in advance. She even noted to herself that next time they could go somewhere together, it would be more fun and easier. Margaret smiled, and her face showed that she was not worried. Valita felt relieved. The tension disappeared, because she was afraid of the reaction, but in vain. Valita turned to Margaret, gathering herself mentally. Before she could start the conversation she had been putting off since the morning, she wanted to do one important thing first. She reached for the small bag, carefully unfolded it, and took out a strange object that seemed to pulsate when touched on its surface. The object turned out to be magical. Valita concentrated and activated it. The space around them changed slightly. The air seemed to freeze, became denser. Margaret didn't expect this. She even froze, not immediately understanding what was happening. After all, she had never seen Valita use magical artifacts before. Valita explained that this object blocked out all sounds from outside and inside. Their conversation was now protected, and even the most sensitive ears would not be able to catch anything. Margaret admitted that it was the first time she had seen something like this. Valita calmly replied that the thing had come in handy, and although it was not quite right, she had taken it from home. The conversation they were about to have was too important. Not a single extra soul could know what exactly they were going to talk about in the next few minutes. It was impossible to even read the words from lips. Everything was so protected. Therefore, Valita did not delay any longer and wanted to find out what happened to that future ruler. Margaret admitted that she felt a little uneasy at first, a slight fear creeping up on her. When he first appeared, the atmosphere was tense and alarming. At first, he seemed like a real predator to her. He gave off a sense of danger, but the longer the conversation went on, the more he reminded her of a lazy cat rather than a wild animal. She imagined him as a cat playing with a caught mouse, leisurely with lazy pleasure, swatting it with his paw, as if delaying the moment when he would finish it off. This gave Margaret the feeling that he was enjoying the game itself. This had been his image since the beginning of Guardian's Garden's development, and Margaret captured it perfectly. Valita decided to ask her friend if he had made any impression on her, if she had been even a little charmed by his manner of behavior. The friend noted with a smile that if the mouse the cat was playing with had been cute and good, she would have felt sorry for it. But since the mouse was infected, the hunt seemed appropriate to her. Of course her friend didn't mean herself, Valita. With a slight grin, made it clear that she understood the hint and perfectly grasped the essence of what was happening. From what was said, it became clear that he was trying to take control of the Aldens, and not just have fun. He had a specific plan and goal, which he was gradually realizing. Margaret confirmed this, which was why he asked her directly if she would like to help set a trap for Marquis Alden. It all looked like a carefully planned move. She had already set a trap for him with the Entente, and if she added anything else, he would definitely not be pleased. This forced her to be careful and consider all possible consequences. Therefore, the girl admitted that she is actually worried, and therefore has many different thoughts in her head that she cannot immediately put in their place. Margaret smiled and remembered her friend's words before the palace. Then she decided that she would follow her heart and do everything her way. She added that, despite everything, she will definitely protect her friend Valita, and nothing will make her back down from this decision. Suddenly, they both turned sharply and noticed that there was a small commotion around them. People began to whisper and pay attention to what was happening around them. They saw a man protesting, saying that it was not right to treat him in this way, but that it was better to leave him alone and not disturb him. He stated that he simply wanted to sit quietly and did not intend to interfere in the affairs of others, hoping that he would be left alone to enjoy his time. Valita, noticing what was happening, instantly changed her expression as soon as she realized who exactly was at the center of all this commotion. It turned out to be Noah Elsius the Archmage, who was immediately greeted by the waiter, who approached him and started a conversation. Valita did not understand what exactly this man was doing here. The waiter, smiling, explained that it was a great honor for him to serve the gentleman and led him to the chosen table. The man, noticing how the waiter treated him with respect, smiled back and remarked that it was indeed worth trying to do so in order to enjoy the moment. He also added that he found a place that he really liked and decided that it was quite suitable for spending time in such a cozy place. When the man noticed Noah looking at him, he immediately knew it was time to finish his meal. With a smile, he announced that he was done and was about to leave the restaurant. Noah, in response to this, smiled and said that in principle, he expected everything went according to plan, as it should have been. Noah, meanwhile, had settled himself at the next table, right next to a group of girls, and felt a little strange, although it was hardly an unexpected turn of events. What were the odds that the man they both knew would be here, and that his presence would allow Noah to sit at this table next to them? Valita couldn't believe that all this was happening right now, and wondered if it was connected to the events that had happened earlier, when she didn't yet know how the situation would develop. Turning to the girls, he politely apologized for any inconvenience and explained that he did not want to disturb them, but considered it necessary to apologize for interfering in their calm conversation. The man also added that for several years, they somehow did not pay attention to him. But despite this, they were able to continue to communicate and enjoy time in their circle. Even though they used magical devices, such conversations in the presence of the Archmage became dangerous. In any case, it was not as safe as one would like to continue the conversation here. He also changed his tone a little and said that this magical device he brought had a unique shape. He had never seen anything like it before, and it caught his attention. He noted that he had never even heard of such magical objects before, and wondered if he could be heard well at the moment, trying to understand how clear everything was. He noted that these were probably protective domes that blocked out external sounds, and he could now confidently say that he knew how they worked and why they were needed. The main character immediately understood that he understood everything. There was no need to explain. It was just his look at the subject that made it clear that he was not a simple person. She decided not to use the item anymore, realizing that he immediately understood its purpose. Most likely he guessed everything as soon as he saw it. The gentleman noticed that it resembled rare magical items that are rarely found and can be very valuable, which immediately caught his attention. He added that he had never seen anything like it either, and therefore wanted to take a closer look at it to understand what kind of magical device it was. The girl was extremely surprised. She realized that this could become a serious problem for her if he began to delve deeper into the study of this subject. She confessed to Margaret that she had actually stolen the object, although the truth was that she had invented it with Oscar. But if he found out, she would be in trouble. Suddenly, Margaret started saying that this was indeed a new product that her family had developed. She emphasized that it was their own invention and was still being developed. Margaret explained that her friend had been involved in the creation of this item, but at the moment, there are still many shortcomings that need to be taken into account for improvement. He realized their words and, smiling, said that this was precisely why he had not noticed this obvious detail before. Everything became clear only now when he finally understood their meaning. He added that he was looking forward to the day when the device would go on sale. There was a certainty in his voice, as if he had already seen that moment in the future. He muttered something unintelligible, as if he had decided that he would no longer disturb them. Now they could continue to communicate without his interference, since his role here was complete. He glanced at Valita as if trying to discern something important in her face, but her expression clearly showed that she did not feel comfortable with this intense gaze. He began to suspect that the girl in the alley might have been her. It all came together in his head as he tried to solve the mystery of what had happened back then. How he managed to find out this remained a mystery to him. He could not understand how he managed to notice such a detail that was hidden from most. He was so badly poisoned that even the most experienced healers could not help him. His body was weakened, and returning to normal seemed impossible. The girl suddenly realized that she just needed to relax a little, find her sweet spot so that everything would become easier. However, the reality turned out to be more complicated than she thought. But suddenly, everything went wrong. The sweet spot just flew out of her hands. She did not expect such a turn of events, and the moment turned out to be much more difficult than she imagined. The man, remembering the moment he was poisoned, felt a chill down his spine. He could not forget how his body resisted treatment and how every step towards healing was a struggle. The girl couldn't understand why her candy rolled towards Noah's feet. It seemed strange and unpredictable, but she didn't know how to explain it. Everything that was happening was a mystery to her, especially why everything ended up on Noah's side. She couldn't find an explanation, although she intuitively felt that something was hidden in it. Everything that was happening reminded him of a situation that had once happened in an alley when he found himself in similar circumstances, and he involuntarily recalled that moment. The man, smiling slightly, noted that a similar situation had happened a few days ago, and he already felt a little easier than the first time. Valita, realizing her rudeness towards the Duke, immediately apologized. She knew that her actions were not entirely appropriate, and she tried to correct it. The gentleman, holding back a smile, said that ladies should not do such things, and he himself, with dignity, picked up the fallen candy, returning the situation to a calmer channel. He added with a smile that it was just a small thing not worth much attention, and it seemed that for him it was nothing more than a trifle. Remembering how angry he had been when he first encountered it, he noticed that now it only made him smile, because each time it became less important. The man wondered if there would be a third such situation, but the girl, not understanding what he was talking about, simply shook her head, clearly not wanting to continue the conversation on this topic. He then noted that there was no point in wasting energy thinking about it, because in reality it did not really matter and was not worth worrying about. Soon he said that he had to go, and the slight smile on his face confirmed that the situation still did not leave him indifferent, despite the light joke. He added that if fate brings them together again, they will definitely meet, but he did not focus on this, just winking slightly. The girl was stunned by what was happening, and a feeling of discontent immediately overwhelmed her. It was completely unexpected, and she could not understand how this could have happened at all. In a fit of anger, she couldn't hold back and cursed him, but suddenly a guy came up to her and quietly told her not to say such harsh words. He pointed out to her that even without the protective dome, they could afford to discuss such things, and this became a strange moment for her. Valita, turning to the guy, said with displeasure that despite everything, she was sure that the others thought almost the same thing about him. The guy noticed that they only think about it, but they can't help but voice their thoughts out loud, which is not always useful, especially when it comes to important matters. The lady, taking the mug in her hands, replied with a smile that she was trying to be careful. She was thinking out loud, trying to understand whether someone really was trying to hide her from the Duke. He noted that it was better to avoid meeting the Duke so as not to attract his attention. He did not believe that everything they did would be useless and hoped for better outcomes. It was unusual for him that he began to show interest in the lady. This behavior seemed strange because before he did not pay attention to her and was always reserved. Jerome Oliver, the manager of the cafe and a member of Valita's organization, was one of those who often helped out in her establishment. He was not only an assistant, but also an important figure in her affairs. The lady wondered why he had suddenly become so interested. She herself could not understand what had happened, but she felt that perhaps it was due to his dissatisfaction with the Aldens. There was a high probability that he recognized her, and that was what made him pay such attention. But the lady herself was not sure why it happened now. At that moment, the chocolate bar suddenly fell. She couldn't understand why it happened at that moment. Everything that was happening seemed too strange and difficult to understand. The lady approached Jerome, telling him to sell the chocolate in a rectangular shape next time, instead of the usual one. Her request was simple, but she felt the need for a change. Perhaps Noah's new path would lead to bad consequences, but it would be better if he showed interest in her, rather than Margaret. It would be more beneficial to her plans. She approached Jerome with an important task. Soon there will be a ball in the imperial palace, where there will be much talk. Jerome should listen carefully to what the guests say. When Noah left, they continued their conversation. Margaret said that the prince was organizing a ball to officially announce that she was the owner of the amulet. This ball was important to keep Carlon in check. Her cafe would as always be the perfect place to eavesdrop on all the gossip and rumors surrounding the upcoming event. The lady said she had to go. She was ready to leave the cafe and continue her business, leaving everything in its place. She left the payment for the tea right on the table. Quickly and without unnecessary words, as often happens in her life, she always does everything automatically. The waiter couldn't help but be surprised every time they worked for her, and she paid for tea like any other customer. It was hard for him to understand this strange situation. The girl explained that it was called a Mobius strip. He didn't understand right away, but despite this, he listened, nodding his head, trying not to show surprise. The waiter was puzzled, but the girl immediately reassured him. It was not important, and he did not need to go into the details of what she meant. She couldn't help but smile too. It was funny that he was telling everyone that she was his lover. It gave her some pleasure, although she knew that it was just a rumor. The waiter suddenly took her hand and kissed it. He did it so unexpectedly that even she did not immediately realize what had happened, but he was sincere in his gesture. He noticed that she had actually been striving for this result herself. It was her desire to get into a situation where he would become her lover. Thanks to the rumors that had spread, she could now talk to him for long periods of time, and there was nothing unusual about it. Everything seemed like a normal development of events. Therefore, he had to remain in this role of lover until the very end. He understood that he could not change the course of events and had to act according to the situation. As he walked her to the carriage, the girl said that he had really played the role well today. She appreciated his actions as if it were part of some plan. She added that if Noah showed up at that location, the waiter should let her know immediately. This information was important, and she knew she had to be prepared for any eventuality. Jerome paused, feeling that something was wrong. He felt a strange tension in the air that told him that there was more going on here than just the usual events. She was so different from the Valita Alden. He knew the change that had come over her was a real shock to him, and he couldn't figure out what had caused it. When she returned home, her father started yelling at her. He asked her if she realized who she was and why she was acting as if she didn't understand anything. He accused her of knowing perfectly well where the amulet that Margaret had was and not telling him anything. This upset him greatly. He felt betrayed. Her brother was furious and told her not to try to lie to him. His words were so furious that Valita felt her insides tighten with fear. They asked her urgently why Margaret had met the prince a few days ago. It was an important event, and they could not simply ignore it. Valita was stunned. She had just returned home and was already being interrogated. It seemed that the news of the upcoming imperial ball had greatly excited everyone around her. If they managed to find out the true purpose of the amulet, they will lose interest in capturing it. However, if it remains a secret, their desire will not weaken. They do not understand the whole situation. They irresponsibly and naively strive for the goal without even understanding what is happening. It is like a dull desire without reason. The girl confidently stated that she saw no reason to talk about this amulet. They already had enough wealth without it to not worry about such trifles. The father could not stand it any longer and shouted loudly that she was absolutely unreasonable and should shut up immediately. His patience was at its limit, and he could not hold back any longer. Valita, without looking at her father, calmly turned away and said that she did not understand why this particular amulet had become so important now. She was sure that everything had happened by Margaret's will. The father was furious. He could not understand why the princess knew about this if it was supposed to remain a secret, but he was still sure that the emperor had entrusted the prince with this task. The father, realizing that the situation was getting out of control, decided to arrange a reception in honor of Margaret to congratulate her on this significant event and show his attention. The father was horrified, and the Valita's brother was incredibly angry. His feelings were as stormy as his father's, which only worsened the atmosphere of tension in the house. Their anger was probably great, since this meant breaking the contract that regulated the transfer of the right to trade in magical items. Such an event could not remain without consequences. If Margaret shows up at a reception, all eyes will be on her. She is interested in how society will react to her presence. She is eager to see their surprise and admiration. The girl, bowing politely, said that she thought she had said all she wanted to. Now it seemed that the moment had come when she must go, and she was going to end this conversation. There were only 10 days left until the important reception, and the time was approaching inexorably. Everything had to be prepared in a short time, and every moment counted for success. The main focus was on preparing a dress that would highlight her elegance, as well as gathering information in the cafe, which allowed her to stay up to date with all the events. The main character's appearance had to be simply stunning, and the preparations went exactly according to plan. Everything went as it should, so that she looked her best on the day of the reception. 10 days passed, and the long-awaited moment arrived. The day of receptions at the imperial palace. It was an event that determined the future, and all the preparations were important. Margaret entered the room and immediately called her friend. They had not seen each other for a long time, and the moment of meeting promised to be full of emotions, expectations, and exciting experiences. When the girl turned around, she was simply delighted with how her friend looked. Every movement, every word emphasized how much she had changed during this time. Margaret was truly irresistible today. Her appearance, exquisite features, and noble bearing gave her an unearthly charm, creating a vivid impression on everyone around her. The friend asked how she looked, not holding back her admiration. Margaret was noticeably embarrassed, but there was genuine joy in her eyes from such a warm assessment of her appearance. This dress, a soft pink color, was the perfect accent for her blonde hair, adding even more luxury and shine to it. It emphasized her femininity and sophistication. The outfit was completed with stunning lace, and the bright red shoes became the main detail, emphasizing Margaret's exquisite style and impeccable taste, giving her entire image a complete look. The design that was part of the original concept of the game looked even more impressive in real life. Everything seemed much more alive and colorful than in the virtual environment. It was amazing. Valita, seeing her friend, approached her and said with a smile that she looked incredible, like a real star. Her words made her truly happy, because her friend really did look beautiful. At this point, the Marchioness Olvia Boden stood up and expressed her gratitude to the Valita. She admitted that, thanks to her, she was able to see her daughter Margaret in such a gorgeous dress. It was a miracle. Suddenly, her father's voice was heard declaring that all this was the result of his ambition and efforts. He spoke with such confidence, as if this was his contribution to what was happening. Everyone listened attentively. Everyone present was a little taken aback, because no one expected to hear such words from him. It sounded unexpected, and everyone immediately began to think about the meaning of his words. The father continued saying that he was very worried because Margaret did not have a decent dress for such an important event. Valita gave her this dress, and he did not know how to thank her. Valita reminded them that they were friends after all, and if it really bothered them, she would ask them to make such a gift for her as soon as the right moment came. Valita suggested that it would be better for them to leave early so as not to be late since it was time to take care of time and not waste precious minutes. Margaret happily climbed into the carriage, anticipating that this evening would be the most memorable in her life. She could not wait for what awaited her ahead. Naturally, the path to the palace would not be easy. The road was long and tiring, but they were ready to overcome all difficulties because the goal was worth it. Suddenly, the carriage stopped abruptly, and Valita looked at her friend with alarm, realizing that something unexpected had happened that required immediate attention. She reassured her friend, assuring her that there was no need to worry and that she should only think about the good because everything would be fine, and they would cope with any difficulties along the way. They will pass through these dangerous lands, and despite all the difficulties, they will be able to get out of there unharmed and will soon find themselves in safety. She advised them not to open the windows and draw the curtains so as not to attract unnecessary attention since their trip was not so safe. It would all be over soon. The road was really dangerous, but they believed that they would be able to go through all the trials and finish this journey without any serious problems. According to the plot, there was an attack on the way to the palace which created considerable difficulties and put everyone in danger, but they continued to move forward. Most likely, this was all planned by Carlin. He tried to steal the amulet, which was quite his style, but she had already foreseen this development in advance. Anticipating possible dangers, she asked the twins to help in advance. She also warned Cooker about the possible threat, hoping that preparation would play a role. Although she tried to remain calm, it was not as if her anxiety had gone away. It was a good thing she had been prepared for this turn of events. In the end, she decided that there was no point in panicking, and everything would be fine. Everything would be resolved, no matter what she felt that she had control. The knight warned her that he would try to make his way through the dangers, but the shaking of the carriage could be strong. He advised her to be careful not to hurt herself. Valita suspected that it might have been Rachel and Roxa, the twins from the Tang clan. They might have arrived in time to help, but she still couldn't be sure. The arrival of the twins was timely, but she couldn't relax completely. She had to hope that everything would work out, although she still felt anxious. Suddenly, a new task appeared before her eyes. The table appeared suddenly reminding her that she couldn't relax when the game moved to a new stage. The task on the screen was to repel the attack, destroy the bandits with the help of allies, and get a badge. The task looked serious and important. When she saw the task, she was shocked. There was something similar in the game, but now it was happening in reality. Many questions arose in her head. However, she still could not understand why, in case of failure or punishment, the consequences could be so terrible. Death. It was difficult to accept. She wasn't the main character, so she couldn't understand why death was so close. Everything that was happening seemed alien to her, as if it didn't concern her. Although, of course, she didn't want Margaret to die instead of her, still, if she was going to die, it would be better if it wasn't her. A sad thought, but alas, a reality. It was necessary to calm down. If the attack was successful, they would kill all the witnesses. It was unlikely that anyone would remain alive, and this was probably their main goal. Rachel and Roxa are protecting them, and this gives them a chance to survive. But there is no need to worry about this now, because first of all, we need to focus on something else. Unlike the game where items are given automatically after fighting bandits, the situation here is completely different. It is unclear whether the twins will be able to find the desired icon and whether they know about its importance. Of course, they probably don't know that her job is to warn them so they can find the sign when they get there. It's important that they don't miss it. Finally, they arrived and were able to get out of the transport. Everyone exhaled, calmed down a little. Although the nervousness had not yet passed, it was only a moment of relief, but not a victory. They were completely exhausted, barely able to stand on their feet. Everyone was at the limit of their strength, and this was understandable, given the severity of what had happened. The knight behind pointed, explaining that there had been 2 attacks. The first had been fought off by the prince's men, and the second by the twins. The information was important and required attention. One attack was repelled by the prince's men, and the other by the twins. The knight emphasized this, explaining that the situation was much more complicated than one might think. She was completely shocked to hear that there were 2 of them. Showing concern, she asked him to tell the twins to immediately start searching for clues that would help identify the attackers. She hoped that at least some traces could lead to a solution, since this was the only way to learn more about the attackers and their motives, as well as possible connections with other participants. At some point, it became clear that one thing was certain. If the prince had indeed sent his men to protect Margaret, then his path had opened up, and this gave new prospects. The outcome of the game now depended on how the events of the attack developed, and everything that happened could affect the overall course of the game, its ending, and even the fates of the main characters. If she had not managed to fight off the attackers, Umar assured that, if the enemy had succeeded, she would have lost the amulet, and perhaps she would even have been kidnapped by Luther, who would have held her captive, hiding her from everyone. However, since the prince sent his men, who managed to intervene in time and prevent the robbers, this spoke of his obvious interest in Margaret and his readiness to protect her. Noah's goal was clearly connected to Valita, and if we don't count Luther, there was one more important character, the head of the knightly order, who could play a key role in what was happening. There is a high probability that they will meet him today at the reception from which the main story will begin, and now every wrong step can seriously affect the entire carefully thought-out plan. In such a situation, she understood that she needed to act quickly and gather her strength, because delay could jeopardize not only her plans, but also the lives of everyone involved in this story. Valita turned to her friend, and with a slight smile said that it was time to smile and get ready, because they had no time left. They had to go so as not to miss the important moment of the meeting. This evening promised to be the best day of Margaret's life, and Valita would do everything to ensure that nothing would interfere with this happy moment. She was ready to guarantee that everything would go perfectly. When they entered the hall, Margaret was clearly agitated. Her face betrayed her worries, although outwardly she tried to remain calm. Every movement betrayed her tension. Margaret's friend, noticing her anxiety, spoke to her gently. She advised her to think of something cheerful that could distract her from her worries and help her relax a little. If she continued to worry, her friend told her she just needed to think about a funny situation, and then everything would become easier. The ease would come with simple thoughts. A friend suggested that Margaret imagine a picture of a cat hitting a snake in the head, with its paw causing it to instantly lose consciousness. This image might amuse her, or she might think that the prince had suddenly turned into a cat and was happily playing with this snake on the ground, creating an unpredictable picture of fun and chaos around. After these words, a smile appeared on Margaret's face. She could not understand how Valita had such an idea, but at some point she began to laugh sincerely. Everyone around began to discuss who this mysterious lady with pink hair could be. They had not yet found any obvious signs of her true identity. Perhaps this girl was some princess unknown from another kingdom. Everyone began to guess who she was and what her purpose was here. It became an important question for everyone. Valita in turn understood that her task today was to support Margaret as a faithful servant. All attention had to be directed only to her in order to avoid trouble. However, despite all the worries, Valita knew that worrying would do no good. She offered Margaret some wine to help her relax and relieve her tension. Margaret thanked him, expressing her appreciation, but her thoughts were interrupted when someone suddenly addressed her. She glanced to the side and immediately realized that someone wanted to get her attention. When they turned around, Luther, Valita's brother, stood before them. He was clearly happy to see her, his face breaking into a wide smile. This was a pleasant surprise for Margaret. She had not expected such a meeting. Luther, pleased to see her, said enthusiastically that Margaret looked absolutely stunning today. He remarked on her beautiful appearance, and this immediately attracted the attention of everyone present. Margaret gratefully accepted the compliment, noting that, thanks to Valita, she had managed to get here without any difficulties. She thanked everyone for their help and expressed her appreciation for their support. She also couldn't help but add that although they knew each other, they weren't close enough for him to call her by her first name. Margaret asked him to understand her desire to maintain distance and respect her personal boundaries. Luther was somewhat taken aback by her words, not expecting such directness. However, Valita, observing the situation, smiled. She knew that Margaret had become much closer to the prince, and now everything was changing. Valita also noted that the journey here had not been easy, adding with a slight grin that this was exactly what they had experienced along the way. Sometimes life throws us challenges that are difficult to overcome. She couldn't help but notice how their carriage trying to go around an obstacle almost overturned. This incident left a vivid impression, but no one was hurt and everyone soon calmed down. Valita's brother, watching the incident, was clearly aware of it. His reaction left no doubt that he was aware of it and perhaps worried about his sister's safety, but he did not show his concern. One of the attacks had been Luther's doing, and the lady was now certain of it. She knew perfectly well that it was no accident, but a carefully planned operation. Luther had always been able to hide his intentions. She expressed her gratitude to her friend, noting that if it had not been for her, poor Margaret could have died. The carriage would have overturned, and the consequences would have been much more serious. Valita is very grateful for the intervention. Valita also couldn't help but notice her father's condition. She noticed that he began to look tired and constantly busy. Obviously, the last few days had been difficult for him, and this couldn't help but make her worry. She thought that perhaps she could help him try to lift his spirits. But knowing his character, she knew that he was again absorbed in his own affairs, and it was not easy for him to accept help even from her. However, he couldn't even allow himself to show irritation when he was around Margaret. He was always too reserved to reveal his true feelings, especially when his precious daughter was around. Valita was sure that they shouldn't have started this whole complicated process with the imperial and empress's visit. It had gotten them into even more trouble, and she now doubted the wisdom of such a step. At this moment, the crown prince entered the hall. His appearance attracted the attention of all present, and he immediately declared that he was glad to see everyone here despite the circumstances, and thanked them for their participation in such an important event. He was genuinely glad that they were all able to attend this event. Despite the external difficulties, the prince did not hide his gratitude for the attention and respect they were shown. He appreciated it. The prince also noted that an important event had recently taken place in their empire. This joyful event, according to him, was to change many things in the near future. It was a significant step forward for the entire empire. He said that they all might not have known about the existence of the ancient cedar amulet. This artifact was an important element for the empire, and now the prince wanted to share new details that he had learned. The prince noted that the cedar amulet, which had been key to the rise of the empire 100 years ago, had finally found a new owner. This treasure was very valuable, and its appearance in their ranks meant new opportunities for the empire. He was going to introduce this man to her right now, without waiting a second. This decision seemed to be dictated not only by determination, but also by the desire to show his confidence in front of everyone. Margaret looked at her friend, and Valita, noticing her anxiety, suggested thinking about the cat its paws, and then imagining how it hits the snake's head with them, which dispelled the tension a little. These words really helped Margaret relax, and her face finally lit up with a smile. The fear and anxiety retreated, and she felt much better. The atmosphere around her changed. As she was about to leave, Luther tried to stop her, but Valita quickly intervened. She calmly told him that he should control himself and not interfere with her decision. His actions were unnecessary. Valita warned Luther that he had better remain calm, as his attempts to interfere would only make the situation worse. Her tone was stern, and he knew he had to stop what he was doing. Luther, in addition to telling his father that Margaret had become the new owner of the amulet, also attacked her. He thought that Valita would not figure out his actions, but he was wrong. She noted that Margaret didn't know anything yet, and that if Luther wanted his sister to keep quiet, he should hold off on further steps. After all, Valita saw perfectly well what was really happening. Valita added that Margaret believes every word she says, and that's how she gains trust. Without proof, just by being confident. That's basically her power and her way of manipulating the situation. Valita advised him to keep quiet and not cause more trouble, because if he continued, she would immediately tell Margaret about the spy he kissed in the merchant guild. The consequences would be severe. Luther continued to hope that he would win Margaret's heart, without any effort, relying only on his luck. But such thoughts only put him at a disadvantage, showing his weakness and underestimation. That is why, despite his efforts, he did not achieve what he wanted for 3 years. His approach was too naive, and even Valita could not hold back her mockery seeing his failures. At that moment, Margaret Aberdeen's name was called, It was important, and everyone around her immediately fell silent, waiting for her reaction. This could be a turning point, and everyone was waiting for her decision. The crown prince approached her and announced that she was the new owner of the amulet. This step was important, and everyone had to know that now her role in these events was changing. "May the words of the treasure always be with her," he said, emphasizing the importance of this moment. It was not just an act of recognition, but a whole ritual symbolizing her new status. The girl smiled quietly, noticing that the light prince was also grinning back. His gaze was full of some warmth, and there was something very attractive and mysterious about it. Margaret thanked the Valita for helping her release the tension. Without her, she might have remained anxious, unsure of what to do in this situation. Valita, in turn, gave her a beautiful dress and calmed her down. If it weren't for her support, Margaret would have found herself in a very awkward situation because she would have felt uncomfortable at that moment. However, Valita did not agree with this view. She believed that her friend could have performed well without her help, because everything was decided by her own strength and determination, and she only contributed a little. Soon Margaret will be bombarded with marriage proposals, and all eyes will be on her. She will be forced to make a choice that will be an important step in her life. Valita warned her not to look at anyone around her. Margaret should choose the one she really likes, not the one who is the best fit in the eyes of society. Soon Luther, Valita's brother, approached them again. He looked closely at Margaret, and as if looking for the right moment, asked her a question that immediately attracted her attention. Luther asked how much longer Margaret planned to spend her time communicating exclusively with Valita. His question was not without a little irony, but there was also concern in his voice about her future actions. After all, Margaret, as the main character of the evening, had to demonstrate her best qualities to everyone. Including on the dance floor, she was obliged to show her skill and confidence. He noticed that she did not have a partner, and taking this into account, offered to be one for her first dance, readily supporting her at that moment. The girls couldn't hide their surprise. They were simply dumbfounded to hear such a ridiculous phrase from him. And all this happened right in front of everyone. He also did not forget to watch his sister's reaction, carefully observing how she would perceive what was happening, since her opinion was important to him. It was perhaps the worst dance invitation that could have ever happened, and the moment itself felt completely awkward and strange for everyone present. After this, the crown prince approached them and noticed that Margaret still seemed to have not decided with whom she would dance, and this was clearly evident from her appearance. He added, with a slight smile, that perhaps he had a chance, and that he was willing to offer his company to share this moment with her. He offered, in a reserved but warm tone, that if she would agree, he would be glad to perform her first dance, with her becoming her partner in this important event. The prince noted that he did not want to seem rude, emphasizing that he was not trying to take this moment away from anyone, because such an incident only happens once. He also added that he would be honored if she chose him as her first dance partner, and he would gladly fulfill that role. The prince, with a slight bow of his head, said that it would be an honor for him if she would agree to dance with him that evening, considering it an important moment for her. Margaret, smiling, replied that it would indeed be an honor for her, and she was glad to accept his offer, despite all the tension of the situation. Everyone present was in complete shock. They could not believe their eyes, realizing that in front of them was not only the prince, but also the owner of the amulet, which raised the whole atmosphere. They looked like a perfect couple, and Valita couldn't help but ask Luther to calm his face, because everything that was happening required endurance. Valita pointed out how harmoniously they looked together, noting that no one in the room could deny it. Everyone present felt their closeness immediately apparent. Her brother reminded her with irritation that he had already told her to shut up. However, Valita could not resist commenting, noting that, unlike the others, the prince was going to take the amulet from Margaret. Despite this, Valita was sure that the prince would not stand aside and would not allow anything to happen without his participation, especially when it came to such an important artifact as this amulet. Luther got angry and said that it was thanks to this amulet that their ancestors were able to gain power 100 years ago. He could not allow their family to be subjugated again. Valita, confident in her opinion, added that the imperial family would probably support the idea of marriage, since such unions always only strengthen positions, even if it is a controversial situation. Luther, overcome with anger, could not restrain himself and struck his sister. His rage was so great that Valita lost her footing and fell to the floor, which only increased his rage. The blow was strong enough that blood began to flow from Valita's mouth. She felt a sharp pain, but despite this, she tried to gather her strength and not give in to panic. Fortunately, Margaret, who was nearby, did not notice the incident. Everything happened so quickly that she did not have time to pay attention to the incident, and Valita was able to hide her pain. Valita noticed that Luther had not only made himself look like an ignorant idiot, but had also humiliated her in front of everyone present. This only added fuel to the fire of her rage. Her words cut like a knife, especially in such an important place where everyone was present. She couldn't help but notice that Luther had not only shown his aggression, but had also created a real scandal among the people. He shouldn't worry too much. She's not going to reveal everything he's done, even though she has enough information to make him uncomfortable. However, she's not going to do that. She whispered softly in his ear that she had something far more terrifying to say back to him. It might change his perception of what was going on. She told him that in order to marry Margaret, he had orchestrated the attack on her. This shocked him, but she was sure that he did not realize the full extent of his actions. The father plans to give the amulet to the emperor if he manages to take it. So he wonders if he can get permission to marry Margaret if this amulet ends up in his hands. He is naive and simple-minded, like a young dog, who aspires to be the leader of the pack, but does not understand all the subtleties of what it means to be the leading role. In reality, he lacks knowledge and experience. After that, she said it was time for her to go. In the end, it was he who told his father, helped the prince get closer to Margaret, and now he cannot escape responsibility for his actions. Margaret walked out onto the balcony, trying to figure out what to do with the pin. She didn't know how to deal with the pain she was feeling, because the situation required even more effort. Magic was certainly a useful thing, but it wasn't as effective as a heating pad. Despite this, magic still had a significant effect, although it didn't always produce the results she expected. Luther is terrible. She told him the truth to his face, and he simply responded by spitting and slapping her. His reaction was unacceptable, and she was outraged by his behavior. He was insane. The situation was so out of control that she felt he just had to stop himself or he would consume everyone around him. His actions were destructive to everyone. Suddenly, she heard someone laughing behind her. Turning around, she saw the person who was laughing apologize to her, as if trying to smooth over his inappropriate reaction to the situation. Valita was startled by the sound of footsteps behind her. Turning around, she saw the man who said he had not meant to laugh at her, and his words sounded sincere and not mocking. She recognized this man immediately because he was familiar to her. He was someone she had seen many times, and his face was unmistakable, although at that moment she was slightly stunned. Of course it was Graham Cordis, the head of the knightly order. She remembered his stern appearance and masculine face, and as it turned out, not only did he know her, but he had heard all her evil words. Graham apologized, explaining that he had not meant to frighten her. He said that he had been concerned about her condition, and upon hearing her discontent, had decided to follow her to make sure she was okay. He hadn't expected to overhear her frank statements, and perhaps because of that, he had acted a little flippantly. But his apology sounded sincere, and she could feel it. Valita smiled, realizing that Graham was being polite and respectful. She admitted that it was her fault for not being able to answer him in front of other people. She was grateful for his concern. Graham came closer, expressing gratitude for her kind words. He also asked if everything was all right, with her health clearly concerned about her condition after their short conversation. The lady understood what he was talking about. He noticed that she had a small wound on her face that obviously could not go unnoticed. She immediately realized that he could not help but notice it. Valita confirmed that there was indeed a wound, but it was small A dot on her face, which as it turned out was not as dangerous as it seemed at first glance. To be always prepared for the unexpected, the Alden family carried a small tube of potion with them. It was an integral part of their daily life, especially when it came to safety. Graham was curious and asked if she really carried the potion with her at all times. He knew how important it was to have it on hand, and his question sounded genuinely interested. Valita, smiling, confirmed his words. Of course, she always carried it with her. It was necessary, especially when she often had to travel through dark and dangerous streets. She usually gave the potion to the twins when they were injured, while protecting her. It was necessary because they were always there when she needed help and were often in danger. After that, he asked the lady if she was afraid. He wanted to understand if she was afraid of what might happen to her in the future. She didn't understand what exactly she was afraid of. He explained that perhaps she was afraid of living in such a dangerous and unpredictable family, where there was always risk. However, the girl answered with a smile that if it is impossible to get out of this situation, then there is no need to worry. However, she noted that at the moment the situation has improved a little. The twins and other servants helped her to put a spoke in Carlin's wheel, preventing her from moving forward and getting what she wanted. Gray was shocked by the cruel treatment she was receiving, but despite this, she continued to smile, which he found incredible. She didn't quite understand what he was talking about, but he just said that it didn't matter, and then asked if she already had a partner. The girl was shocked by such a question. It was so unexpected that she did not know how to react to it. She replied that this was not true, that she did not have a partner, but her words sounded with some confusion, and even slight doubt. Then Graham approached her with a proposal. Would she agree to dance with him, at least one dance, to distract herself a little? She was confused. Inside, she already felt agreement, but in words, she still said that she was asking for forgiveness, but she was not dancing. She really wanted to apologize to him, because her refusal was more a consequence of her own internal conflict than a desire to offend him. All this happened because Graham was one of the two normal young men in the game, and the girl felt that he absolutely had to meet Margaret. The girl noticed that she felt a little dizzy after the blow, and this added to the discomfort, especially when she tried to stay on her feet. Her head was heavy, but she tried to concentrate on what was happening. At that moment, Noah came up to her. He told her that she should rest and not continue to stand for so long because her condition clearly required attention and time to recover. His words sounded soft and caring. The girl was in complete shock when she noticed him. Not knowing how to react correctly, she felt a strange sense of uncertainty. The situation was completely unexpected and unbelievable. Noah Elsius stood before her, and she couldn't understand how he had ended up here. He was the same man she knew, but his appearance in this place was a mystery to her. Noah Elsius seemed to appear out of nowhere, and each time his appearance was just as unexpected. Each time the girl became more and more lost in his mystery and unusual ability to be everywhere. Finding herself between the two characters, the girl felt extremely uncomfortable. It was like being stuck in a moment where it was impossible to choose a side or just walk away from what was happening. Indeed, there was something clearly wrong with them. They were both acting strangely, as if they were hiding some secrets that could change their behavior. All this only increased the tension. If you think about it, their knight clearly had no respect for either the rulers or those who served the snake. This behavior made the situation even more mysterious and unsettling for the girl. However, if they were going to fight, she definitely didn't want to watch it. Seeing them clash would be too unpleasant and dangerous, especially considering how quickly the situation could get out of control. The girl decided that it would be better to just leave so as not to be part of this tense moment. She greeted the Duke, but immediately apologized, feeling that she should not stay here. The apology was made immediately because the girl felt that her presence here was only making the situation worse. She knew that she had better leave this place so as not to become part of something she had no control over. Noah, noticing her condition, turned to her and said that if she was dizzy, she should not bow so hard. He suggested that she ease this movement so as not to aggravate her discomfort and thus showed concern. She should have been more careful because the situation could have led to undesirable consequences. The girl could not understand what had happened to him, why he had become so attentive and caring. He was the same man who had caused her one disappointment after another, and now he was suddenly showing a strange kindness that seemed completely ridiculous to her one big red flag. She was grateful for his care and attention, but still decided that she should apologize. She was a little tired and needed rest, so she asked for some time to herself. As she was about to leave, Graham approached her. He asked if she was really feeling okay, if her health situation had worsened, and wanted to know what was going on. Graham came even closer, and informed her that she might feel weak and even faint on the way. He offered to accompany her so that she would not be left without help until she reached the rest room. She did not want him to accompany her, even if he was sincere in his intention. If he was going to leave, it would be better if he went to Margaret without worrying about her. Of course, she didn't say it out loud, so as not to offend him. Instead, she thanked him for the offer, saying that she could manage on her own without his help and would be able to get to the right place. Suddenly, the Duke stopped her and said that if she was in trouble, he, as the only noble knight, could offer his help. According to him, it was he who should take care of the protection of this place, and not just worry about her. Graham turned to the Duke and informed him that magic was strictly forbidden here, and added that any violation of this rule would have consequences. His voice was full of confidence and determination. But then Noah, with a smirk, said that if Graham had any complaints about his actions, he could safely complain to the Emperor himself. This was a hint about who really had influence in the Empire. Graham couldn't resist asking Noah sarcastically if his tongue was bothering him, hinting at his excessive chatter, which in his opinion was completely out of place. There was a slight irritation in his words. Noah, not having lost his temper, replied that Graham could see for himself whether his tongue was a hindrance. He spoke with an expression as if each answer he gave were part of a game he was happily continuing. Valita realized that the time had come for her to leave. She knew that if open conflict broke out between them, she would suffer the consequences as well. Now was the time to escape before things got out of hand. She felt that if they started arguing in earnest, it wouldn't be just them who would suffer. She could end up in the middle of it all, and she didn't like that at all, so she decided to act quickly. Noah, noticing how hard the lady who was not in the best condition was taking the conversation, assumed that she was tired of all this arguing. He did not want to disturb her anymore, knowing that she needed relief. He suggested to her that they could go together, and he was ready to help her with this. With these words, he took a step forward, as if showing that he was ready to take responsibility and support her in this difficult moment. After his offer, Valita realized that she now had no excuse to run away. She had no choice, and she felt her will begin to give in to his pressure. She extended her hand to him, and together with Noah, they left the place where this tense conversation was going on. For her, it was a logical decision, although inside she felt many conflicting emotions. Graham, in parting, expressed his wish that her wound would heal as quickly as possible. His words were short, but they sounded sincere, as if he really wished her a speedy recovery. He continued to hope that when they met next time, her condition would improve, and she would feel much better than she did now, freed from the burden of painful sensations. Valita was taken aback when he kissed her hand. She felt awkward, and even a little embarrassed, not expecting such a gesture from him, which was completely unexpected and new. She promised with a slight smile that they would definitely meet again, hoping that this meeting would not be the last. As she said goodbye, her heart beat faster from unspoken emotions and a strange excitement. Turning around, she was about to walk with Noah, walking away with him, until her mind was completely occupied with the process of what had just happened between them. She wasn't quite sure how to act. Valita was completely confused, not understanding what she should do next. Her feelings were in complete chaos, and she could not make a decision on how best to act in this difficult situation. With Noah by her side, she would return, and all eyes would be on her, which could not help but worry her. She knew that this would lead to conversation, and her presence would attract the attention of those around her. She didn't want to be noticed by her father, Carlon. The less she was seen, the calmer she felt, because she didn't need to attract any extra attention to herself. Valita told Noah that she could walk there herself. It was more convenient for her than drawing unwanted attention to herself. She didn't want anyone to notice her or start commenting on her presence. Noah, observant as always, noticed traces of magic on her cheeks. He realized that she had drunk a potion that left this mark, and this only confirmed her condition and the need for additional care. However, he knew that this potion would not heal her completely right away. It would not give instant results, but he was ready to help her if she wanted. Valita noted that she would cope when she returned home. She also emphasized that even if he hadn't decided to help her, she would have managed without him. But she was still grateful for his care, even if she didn't always want to accept help from others. He could not understand why this was so, and was surprised to notice that in fact, he was just an angel ready to sacrifice something in order to save a dying man. Noah teases her, now remembering their first meeting in that tight alley when it all started, and she looked so vulnerable and confused. The girl assured him that she was not trying to deny what was happening, but there was no point in his help because everything had already been decided long ago, and their paths did not cross. Noah stated that she never agreed to help, and that day she knew exactly what words she needed to say to avoid further complications. He had not heard anything like it for a long time, and his face remained inscrutable as he addressed her as if she were only part of an obscure and confusing past. But the girl just threw up her hands and said that she didn't understand what he was even talking about because she just wanted to save the stranger without thinking about the consequences. It didn't matter to her who was standing in front of her. The only thing that mattered was helping the person in trouble and resolving the situation without further ado. At that moment, he abruptly pressed her against the wall, asking if she really didn't recognize him, didn't sense who was really hiding behind his appearance. It seemed to him that after that first meeting, he never left her mind, and she unconsciously began to think about him, to remember him in the most unexpected moments. And now he noticed that he was interested in when she would realize that in fact, she was his only savior, that she had changed his life so much. But the girl understood that it was a lie, because he could not be her benefactor. He was simply using her, manipulating her kindness, and this was obvious from the very beginning. Valita couldn't understand what had prompted him to do such a thing. It all seemed unnecessary to her, especially considering that his actions clearly made no sense and were too provocative. She noted that he must have known about poisonous snakes and how dangerous they were. It was obvious, and most likely, that was why he had such hatred for the Aldens. He hinted that she might be going to bite him right now, as if to remind him of that incident when she ran away from him. It all sounded strange and scary. He offered to show her the poison that was hidden in her body, and promised that in exchange for this, he would fulfill any of her wishes. His words were full of threat, but there was also a certain irony in them. At that moment, a girl suddenly approached them and immediately turned to Valita, interrupting their conversation. It was obvious that she was completely confused by what was happening. It was Natalie, and her shocked expression couldn't go unnoticed. She was clearly stunned by what was happening around her and felt out of place. Natalie Alden was Valita's half-sister, and although her situation was difficult, she remained an important figure in the household. Their relationship was definite, but complicated. Although Carlon Alden did not recognize Natalie as a direct descendant, she was still allowed to live on the family estate, which became an exception to the rule for everyone else. The reason for Natalie's position was that she, like Luther, was an indispensable member of the Alden family, possessing important and rare talents that brought benefit to the family. However, under Carlon's orders, Natalie had to master the sword, which was an unexpected turn in her life. It gave her importance, but also brought additional complications. Valita and Natalie were sisters, and despite all the difficulties, they had a fairly good relationship, which was a real rarity in the Alden family. After Kang Hyun was reborn as Valita, it seemed that Valita was really lucky that Natalie showed up here right now, because her presence could somehow change the situation, give new hope or an opportunity to solve the problem. Valita couldn't figure out what his face was expressing. She was clearly aware that he was being threatened, but the expression was unsettling. It didn't fit the situation she was in. Natalie asked timidly if she had intruded on their private moment. She wasn't sure how comfortable this was for them. There was a hint of alarm in her words. Valita had no idea that her sister was dating him. His Majesty. It was a surprise to her, and she could hardly imagine how they could end up together, sharing such closeness. Suddenly, Valita realized that Natalie was actually home, and that there was something more going on between her and Noah. She couldn't believe how quickly their relationship was progressing. Noah said with a strange note that it was a real pity, because he would have liked to enjoy this secret rendezvous a little longer. His words were not exactly a joke, but not entirely serious either. Valita was furious at the way he spoke. Does this bastard really think he can manipulate people so easily? She thought, completely confused about what was going on. She tried to say something in response, but at that moment she felt Noah's magic affecting her. It was almost imperceptible, but enough for her to understand that he was using his power again. It was only after a few moments that Valita realized that the pain was gone. It was the result of his magic. His power had clearly taken away all of her discomfort and given her relief that she hadn't even asked for. Noah, as if expecting gratitude, said that if the pain returned, she could always come to him. His voice was cold and self-assured, as if he were doing her a favor and not the other way around. He also noted that since she had done him a favor, he was willing to kill the one who had hurt her, and he would do all this for free without any demands in return. His words sounded as if they had weight. Then he took her hand and kissed it. This gesture was unexpected and did not cause her either joy or horror. Everything that was happening seemed unreal and too fast. He said goodbye to her, as if not only had they finished their conversation, but everything that had happened up to that point was no longer important. Valita couldn't understand how things had gotten to this point so quickly. Natalie was stunned to the core. Everything she saw defied explanation. The Duke next to her sister? Such a sight knocked the ground out from under her feet. Usually, the Duke always left an ominous impression on her, but this time it looked even more frightening. He looked truly frightening, as if he had just emerged from a nightmare. Natalie tried to understand how her sister could have ended up next to this person. Everything that was happening seemed completely incredible and strange to her, and if this was indeed a real date, then Natalie admitted that she felt guilty. She may have unwittingly interrupted, and now sincerely apologized for the misunderstanding. Valita noted wearily that her sister clearly had problems with her eyesight and logic. Her ridiculous questions were just annoying, and she clearly should have just left and let her rest. But the sister did not calm down, considering her rude. She called Valita evil, but admitted that it was still interesting. It seemed that the Duke really showed interest in her. Valita replied that perhaps he was interested, but certainly not in the sense that everyone was used to understanding it. Everything was much more complicated and confusing than it seemed at first glance. Natalie shrugged, adding that there was no need to worry. Her father would never know. He already hated the man, constantly calling him a strange and threatening owl. By the way, she recently ran into him by chance. This moment suddenly popped up in her memory, as if fate was trying to warn her in advance or hint at something more. Valita asked if she was talking about the Duke, and Natalie confirmed it. There was no mistake. His figure, his voice, his manner. Everything about him was impossible to mistake even from a distance. It happened when Natalie was walking home alone. She was walking along her usual path, but suddenly she noticed him in the alley. At that moment, her heart sank from surprise. Usually, he would walk past her as if she didn't exist. But that day was different. He stopped, looked her straight in the eye, and started a conversation which had never happened before. Valita asked him what exactly he had said. Natalie replied that it was nothing special, just a few words, but his eyes were clearly tired and disappointed. If you think about it, everything is exactly the same as last time. As if in a circle, the situation returns, leaving the same feelings, the same guesses, and a strange sense of inevitability. He knew what even the rejected children of the serpent looked like. Maybe he didn't immediately realize she was Alden, but something caught his attention. Maybe he noticed her when he was watching the rest of their family. Valita confessed that she urgently needed Natalie to take her to the restroom. After the conflict with Luther and the conversation with the Duke, she simply had no strength left. It seemed like she would collapse. But if he continues to do so, it will all end in scandal. Just imagine. When he becomes the head of the clan, the whole castle will be in an uproar over the way he behaves in public. Suddenly, a new task appeared before Valita, and with it, a table. What she saw caused her a real shock. Her heart began to pound as if foreseeing trouble. While all this was happening, Graham was restless. His face was full of anxiety, as if he had a premonition of something serious, but he couldn't yet figure out what it was. And suddenly, someone approached him. It was unexpected. Graham did not expect that he would be addressed right in the middle of the ball. He was confused, not knowing how to react. It turned out to be the Crown Prince himself. He asked a simple but strange question. Was Graham really enjoying this ball? And he felt his insides tighten. Graham immediately bowed respectfully, according to all the rules of etiquette. He smiled tensely, trying to hide his embarrassment, because he did not expect the prince to suddenly speak to him. The prince, as if in jest, noted that Graham had not even danced today. The women were already losing hope and were shedding tears because none of them had been honored with his invitation. Graham thought for a moment and noted that he could not understand why he should dance since he was a knight, and his duty was first and foremost to protect the crown prince and the emperor himself, and not to participate in the ball. However, the crown prince suggested dancing anyway, assuring that with such training and discipline as Graham, even during the dance, he would not lose control of the situation. To this, the knight calmly agreed, adding that he had in fact already tried, but had been refused, and therefore did not even insist on it any further. The crown prince was astonished and asked with obvious bewilderment what kind of woman could dare to refuse Graham. He had never heard such a thing before. With a grin, he suggested that perhaps the knight had simply made his offer to the wrong party. Maybe he should have asked a man to dance. Graham was a little confused because he didn't expect that the crown prince seriously thought that there was no other reason for refusal at all. Then the crown prince, smiling, remarked that he was right in general. A knight was rarely refused. But despite the lightness of his tone, these words touched Graham deeper than he himself had expected. The prince added that the knight was too handsome to be rejected, and could not rest until he knew who exactly had dared to do this, for it seemed almost impossible to him. Graham mentally promised that he would definitely tell everything when the right moment presented itself. He understood that it would not be possible to hide it for long. At this time, Valita was already in the restroom. She had left the ball because she suddenly felt uneasy and needed peace and quiet. She sank down onto the sofa, feeling a terrible heaviness in her body. She was choked by an incomprehensible feeling of guilt, as if she had been punished for something. The pain in her head intensified so much that Valita could no longer hold back her groans. It seemed that a little more, and she simply would not be able to bear it. Her whole body was shaking from the tension. This happened because Valita accidentally activated a hidden quest. She involved Graham too much, which exceeded the required level, and thus opened the way to the secret ending. She couldn't understand why it was her actions that triggered the Graham line. At that moment, the prince suddenly remembered that he had forgotten to mention an important detail that explained everything. He noted that he had not invited Graham just like that, but because he wanted to introduce him to an important person with whom he would be working closely. Graham, a little puzzled, asked again to make sure he had understood correctly. As they spoke, a noble lady was approaching them. It was Margaret Ebeden, the girl who had now become the new keeper of the Cedar clan's amulet, which immediately aroused everyone's interest. Lady Ebeden introduced Graham, formally calling him as the head of the knightly order, Graham Cortis, which was especially significant in their circle. Margaret was genuinely pleased to meet him, and Graham, for his part, congratulated her on being entrusted with the amulet, an ancient and responsible role. The crown prince said that since they would be meeting often now, they should establish friendly relations and get to know each other better. After all, the keeper of the amulet can never feel completely safe, even among allies, and must be on guard. Graham looked up at the boxes where Carlon Alden sat. His gaze was dark, almost angry, clearly displeased with what was happening. There are many people in this world who are greedy for power and ancient relics. They do not leave alone, even those who just want to live in peace. The Aldens always pick the most vulnerable to test and then attack. That's why Graham asked if Margaret was okay. Margaret felt genuinely grateful for his concern. Although a lot had been going on lately, she genuinely believed that she could handle it all and felt quite confident. The girl mentally noted that since her friends were next to her, any fears retreated. Their support gave her strength and confidence, making her believe that everything would be fine. The crown prince once again decided that this was the same girl that Margaret often mentioned. He noticed to himself that since their first meeting, she had been talking about this friend incessantly. Then he had a desire to meet her. Margaret noticed that she had not seen her for a long time. Perhaps she had gone out onto the balcony and simply had not returned to the hall yet. Graham finally decided to ask if this was the young lady from the Oldig family. He remembered that she had unusually expressive green eyes that were hard to forget. Margaret immediately understood who he was talking about and confirmed that yes, it was indeed Valita. She assumed that they might already have known each other. At that moment, he finally realized that the girl who was with Noah was Valita Alden. Her facial features, mannerisms, and voice came back to him. Graham remembered that he had indeed seen her. She looked tired and tense, and seemed to be looking for a place where she could rest for a while in silence. The Crown Prince reasoned that if Graham knew so many details, it meant that they had had a conversation and that he had personally communicated with Valita. Graham tried to explain himself, but the strict principal noted with certainty that it was Lady Alden who was in that place. He left no doubt despite the knight's confusion. The captain seemed to be under the spell of her charm, perhaps, without even realizing it. His gaze became absent-minded, and his demeanor unusually gentle. Despite this, Margaret was sure that her friend could not have done anything like that. Meanwhile, the knight himself remained silent, confused, as if he did not know what to do with himself. People whisper that Valita is a frivolous person, busy with nothing but cunning and intrigue. The rumors multiplied, fueled by the discontent of others. But he cannot admit that the same girl is Valita, because despite the gossip and ridiculous accusations, she still smiles brightly at everyone. Yet deep down, he began to realize that perhaps he had jumped to conclusions and was now regretting his decision. Perhaps he shouldn't have left her alone with Duke Elsia's thoughts about the possible consequences haunted him. But soon, the anxiety gave way to joy. The lady appeared in the hall. Her appearance immediately changed the mood of those present. The servants and courtiers surrounded her, vying with each other to ask about the ball. Everyone had heard that it had been magnificent, and they were eager to know the details. However, the lady gently made it clear that there would be time to talk about this. She was not ready for discussion now. Austen couldn't understand what had happened. The lady looked as if her strength had left her, and she was about to collapse from exhaustion. Valita was lost in her thoughts again, not understanding what her life had become. It seemed that everything that was happening to her was a punishment, and she could not understand why all this was happening to her. One of the servants, observing her experiences, noted that, in his opinion, she lived a completely ordinary and even calm life, unlike others. He also added that karma determines the fate of everyone, and everything that happens in life is the result of one's own actions taken earlier. Hearing this, Valita, knowing how such reasoning works, decided that she had no choice but to punish him. Let him feel how karma works by cutting his salary. Then he changed the subject and noted with alarm how pale she had become since the ball, adding that he would immediately call a doctor to check her health. To this, Valita replied that if she had known in advance how capable he was of pretending, she would have made him her personal spy at the palace long ago. She felt very tired, but what worried her most was that for some reason the ending of Graham had opened, and she couldn't understand why it was her. With Noah, it was clear. There really was a connection between them, because she saved him before he met Margaret, and this influenced the course of history. But Graham is the head of a knightly order, and it is unlikely that it is just because Luther once slapped him. There is clearly another more serious reason. Or maybe, if you think deeper, everything is much more complicated than it seems, and the reason is not on the surface, but is hidden in the very course of the plot, which she has not yet unraveled. She turned to Austen, thinking about how many people had tried to get him 3 years ago. He had been in great demand then, and she was lucky that he had agreed to work for her. Austen confirmed that there were indeed many offers, but he chose her because he found it interesting. Plus, she paid generously, much more than other employers. Valita wondered if the head of the knightly order, Graham Cordis, had tried to recruit him. She had long wondered about this question, knowing how important such personnel were. Austen was dubious about Graham. He couldn't understand why he would be needed by someone who already had to solve everything by force. It seemed that the offer had come not from the Duke himself, but from some acquaintance. This man had extensive connections. He knew Captain Cordis, and assured that Austen would also be able to establish profitable acquaintances through him. There were many promises, but everything seemed doubtful. However, the amount of payment was too low. Austen politely declined, but now he wondered why Valita had decided to bring this up after so long. It's been 3 years, and in that time, she's only managed to fulfill the conditions for unlocking new endings twice. The first time was when she risked everything to save the Tang clan twins. The second point is that she hired Austen. Valita felt that these actions were not random. If the twins had anything to do with Noah's ending, then Austen was important. With Austen tied to Greyholm's ending, and perhaps playing a key role in it, Valita began to wonder if she'd missed details she'd overlooked at the time. So both endings could have been opened 3 years ago. Realizing this, the girl felt a pang of guilt and hoped that she would not make such a mistake again because the price was too high. However, it was too late to regret it. Everything was in the past, and now she had her faithful twins and reliable ally Austen, whom she could rely on at any moment. Valita noted that knowing the reason for the events now made her feel much better. Austen still asked what had happened today. Was it the unsuccessful debut that had caused her anxiety? But she immediately dispelled his doubts, saying that the debut went well, and the reason for her excitement was in no way connected with Margaret. It was something completely different. Austen then suggested that perhaps something had happened to the twins, and indeed, they soon appeared next to their mistress, as if they sensed her condition. The twins thought she was calling them, but Valita reassured them that everything was fine. Now she assumed that things had been hard for them, but she didn't ask about it directly. However, they only shrugged their shoulders, assuring that nothing terrible had happened. For them, destroying villains did not seem difficult or anything special. Valita ran her hand through their hair, praised them, and hoped they weren't injured, as it was important to her that they were okay. She then thanked them sincerely for saving her, knowing that without their intervention, everything could have ended differently, and therefore she was especially grateful. It was important for her to make sure that none of the enemies were left alive. She asked about it softly, and the twins only nodded, confirming her guess. They said that all the opponents had been destroyed. Valita realized how incompetent the people hired by Carlin were. There was no threat from them at all. The more knowledge she accumulates, the better for her, especially if Rachel and Roxa develop quickly. These two will prove very useful in the final part of her adventure. She doesn't regret one bit that she decided to save them back then, despite all the risks. She felt that she did the right thing, and now it's bearing fruit. She noted that she had asked them to bring back an item left behind by the robbers. She was primarily interested in whether there was any badge among them that could reveal key evidence. The twins didn't seem to hear her pretending to ignore everything. She immediately realized that they were withholding information, perhaps not wanting to upset her. When she realized that she hadn't really hoped for such an outcome, she realized that for her, this was just another quest, a test that she had to pass. In any case, she couldn't believe that everyone was alive and that everything ended so well. It was impossible, especially considering that it could have ended in tragedy. Suddenly, a new red quest appeared in front of her. Something unusual. Usually, all the tasks were blue. But this was something different, and it immediately caught her attention. The quest was a failure. She defeated the bandits, but could not find the badge. The message said that there would be no reward since the goal was not fully completed. The quest had failed, and the message of punishment was clear. Death. This was unexpected for her, especially after surviving the attack. Valita couldn't believe her eyes, not knowing if she should take this seriously. Yes, she didn't find the badge, but surviving the attack was already a huge achievement. However, despite this, a new quest was revealed to her. But the prince's patronage, so necessary for survival, was still inaccessible to her. Valita needed to meet them and try to win their favor again. If she failed to do so, she would face her punishment, death at the hands of Carlon. This task seemed like a stupid quest, but the game seemed to be really determined to destroy her. Death was constantly waiting for her at every turn, and she barely survived the previous trials. Although she survived, she failed to complete this task completely. If she fails to win the prince's trust this time, her fate will be sealed. Death is inevitable. The game seemed to be trying its best to destroy it. The twins, noticing its state, began to ask questions. What was wrong with it, and did this icon really have such a meaning? They were ready to go back and look for it again. The twins tried to calm her down by offering her chocolate, and Austen was stunned by how caring these children were towards an adult girl. This behavior did not fit into his ideas. Valita replied that even if they returned, Carlon had probably already taken the badge. There was no hope of its return. She had already lost everything she could. Austen, not quite understanding, asked if she really needed proof that the attack had taken place. For him, the situation remained confusing and complicated. The gentleman replied that yes, they and the prince would definitely figure out that this was Carlin's doing, but without proof, nothing would change. The law and the rules were merciless, and no emotion could change the outcome. Perhaps the crown prince could find this badge. It was a faint hope, but in a situation where every chance was important, even a small probable event could change everything. It is quite possible in such a situation, there is no need to worry. If nothing can be done, then worrying is pointless. Expecting changes when they are impossible means wasting your energy in vain. It is necessary to prepare for the conversation with her father, but for this, it is important to first gain the prince's trust. Only then will it be more difficult for Carlon to obtain the right to trade in magical weapons. For all these 3 years, she has been persistently trying to interfere with the activities of the Entente. After all, in addition to regular trade, the organization is also engaged in the distribution of magical weapons, which creates additional problems. Therefore, it is important to resolve the issue of Carlon's monopoly on the production and sale of such weapons. Otherwise, the situation will only get worse, and it will be easier for him to control the situation. In that case, she would need to establish good relations with the imperial family in order to successfully sabotage the elder Alden's plans and thereby weaken his position. Perhaps it is worth trying another way to gain the prince's trust. It is important to find a new approach that will strengthen the bond with him and buy time to achieve your goals. The girl was surprised, but immediately turned to Kostyan to clarify what he meant. The ambiguity in his words interested her, and she decided to get precise explanations. He noticed that her badge bore the emblem of Carlon. This was an important point that she could not ignore, as the symbol could reveal much about her affiliation and intentions. She already knew this, and now she had to decide what to do with this information. Knowledge of the badge opened up new possibilities for manipulation in the political game. They won't be able to handle this snake. Its head is too strong, and they won't have enough strength to bite it off. It will be a difficult battle, and they must be prepared for the consequences. Making family badges is not an easy task. It is an art that requires special materials and attention, which are chosen with special care. Everything matters. Sometimes, very rare materials are used to make them, including the blood of family members, to infuse the sign with a piece of their power and heritage. This is important for preserving traditions. Valita, as the heir of the Alden family, has access to the most important information related to such signs. She can learn all the intricacies of their creation and apply this knowledge in practice. Then she finally realized that Austin was truly a genius. His ability to predict events and find solutions amazed her. This strengthened her belief in his abilities. Even if she only gets a small piece of this badge, she can use it. To do this, she will need to obtain materials alert the craftsmen and allow them to begin work. Valita couldn't imagine what she would do without Austin. His help was irreplaceable, and her confidence in his ability to act in any conditions grew stronger. Austin asked jokingly if it was okay to pet an adult on the head, since he wasn't a child. He was a little embarrassed, but curious about the gesture. Valita smiled. He was younger than her, after all, and after her rebirth, she began to feel older than she actually was. Her experience and knowledge were now important in their interactions. She noted that as his boss, she could make such gestures and asked Austin to remember their plan. However, she had to change it slightly, which made him unhappy. He was very annoyed, asking why the plan had to be changed and what had happened. He did not understand why it was necessary, because everything was going according to the original plan. Valita admitted that she understood his feelings, but explained that there was no other way to act. She asked him to calm down, because there was no other way. Austin started screaming, not understanding what had happened. He demanded to be told immediately what had changed in the plan, because he had to know about it. The situation was extremely confusing to him. The girl explained that she had no choice, and that after saving the twins, everything changed dramatically. The situation became tense, and she had to make new decisions that turned the course of events around. Austin reminded her that it had happened 3 years ago, so he wasn't sure what the past had to do with it. He thought it had to do with the system, which she had asked him to do something about the head of the order. Valita replied that he was indeed good, and she was going to introduce him to Margaret. However, he did not understand what the problem was. And then she began to suspect that the head of the order had taken an interest in her. Valita noted that Austen notices details very quickly, and this is very convenient for her. Thanks to this, she does not have to explain all the circumstances in detail. He quickly grasps everything. Austen asked if the lady was serious, and if it was really just him. He couldn't believe the situation had changed so much, and he needed more clarity to understand what was happening. Valita admitted that it was also about Duke Elsius, and his participation was also important. Austen could not contain his emotions. He exclaimed that the lady was simply crazy. All this seemed ridiculous to him. Austen was so angry that he didn't know what to do with himself. He felt his anger growing, and he couldn't understand how this could have happened, why the circumstances had changed so much. He wondered how much the plan had changed. It bothered him that everything looked so different now, and he couldn't see how that would affect their next steps. Valita reassured him that the changes were not that great. Fortunately, Margaret's potential husband, the Crown Prince, seemed genuinely interested in her, which could lead to new opportunities. However, she still didn't know how Margaret really felt about the Crown Prince. She needed time to sort out her feelings and understand what would happen next. The Knights Organa wasn't sure they would view Margaret as a potential romantic partner, and she herself wasn't particularly interested in them. Her opinion on the matter was fairly clear. However, it was clear to her that her simple desire to get rid of these people might not be enough to make them back off. It would require more effort on her part than she might expect. You'll have to tolerate their presence until they achieve their goal. To others, it will look like they're just trying to court her, although their true motives are hidden. Austen couldn't understand at all why he found himself in this situation. He knew that Margaret was an exceptional person, but he still couldn't understand what made her make such unusual decisions. The Duke decided that meeting Margaret could be useful, especially considering that the two could play an important role in the future. He knew that their interaction was not accidental, and that there was something hidden behind it. Austen came to the conclusion that she definitely needed their skills, but for what purpose he couldn't figure out. Everything remained vague, and it irritated him, giving him no peace. After all, she is a villain, and according to the plot, she must die in the final choice. She has no way to avoid this fate. This imposed certain restrictions on her actions, which greatly complicated the situation. In any case, it wasn't worth paying too much attention to. Austen knew he had to get on with making the badge. Sometimes she would send the twins to him, and he had no choice but to keep working. Austen said that the twins should stay close to the mistress, as she might do something reckless, and he needed to be sure that they were under control. The lady claimed that she never acted rashly. All her actions were forced by circumstances, and she always tried to think before acting, although sometimes not everything worked out. Austen then noted that he could no longer count the number of times Carlin and Luther had threatened her and humiliated her for trying to protect others. This was becoming increasingly disturbing and confusing to him. He also noticed that it seemed she even cut her hand to save the twins. It was not just a gesture, but a desperate act that left a mark on the memory of everyone who was there. The twins confirmed that Austen was right. Indeed, the lady sometimes acted impulsively, and although her actions might seem thoughtless, there was a logic and reason to it. There was no need to say that Luther had been slapped, despite all the circumstances. This event remained in question and was not discussed at this point. Valita realized that she would have to take matters into her own hands, despite the threats from her father, who always tried to manipulate her demanding immediate action. She knelt before him, feeling his rage as he screamed, demanding that she admit her guilt immediately, as if her life depended on it. At that moment, it was clear that she would have to confess if she wanted to stay alive, and there would be no other way out, as the pressure from her father became increasingly unbearable. Valita felt she could no longer keep her secrets. The promise she had made to herself was broken, because she had to reveal what she had hidden for so long. He did not calm down, and furiously asked why she could remain silent at all, without explaining what she was guilty of. It was like a cry of despair, which took away her last strength. Valita realized that her father had found out about her relationship with Noah Elsius, and this was the cause of all her troubles, because he could not forgive her for choosing him. The moment she heard his accusations, Valita was in shock. Her whole life seemed to be falling apart because she did not expect her father to reveal her secret so quickly. She couldn't believe that this was happening to her. Her response was complete bewilderment, and she exclaimed that this was all some kind of nonsense that had nothing to do with reality. Her father didn't give her time to think, and asked her again if she thought he hadn't noticed her leaving the ball on Elsius's arm. Everything was becoming clear. The girl began to feel that she was not walking of her own free will, as if someone was imperceptibly guiding her steps. This realization came to her when the events around her began to seem increasingly strange and illogical. Then her father, noticing her confusion and tension, decided to ask what they were actually doing together in that situation. His questions were serious, and he expected an honest answer from his daughter. She couldn't admit the truth because she didn't want to upset him. Instead, she said that he asked strange questions going from one to another. It scared her a little, but she didn't know how to explain it. The newspaper was immediately interested in what these questions were. The girl replied that they were about Ananta and some twins, but she could not understand how she could know what this was supposed to mean. Everything was a mystery to her. The father, hearing her answer, was shocked. He realized that it was too strange, and that it seemed like someone had interfered too much in their lives where he did not belong. This worried him greatly. Valita, noticing the worry in his eyes, asked him a question, trying to understand what was really going on. She tried to figure out if all this could somehow be connected to their family and her destiny. Her father, irritated by her curiosity, sharply replied that it was none of her business. His patience snapped, and he began to swear because the situation with the amulet had become a real source of concern for him. Valita overheard the conversation between the middle prince and Margaret, and it did not go unnoticed. She knew it was important information, so she treated it with due attention and awareness of the consequences. Valita was indeed aware of what was being said, and it gave her a certain determination to her behavior. That is why she understood that a meeting with Austin was inevitable, and she had to be prepared for the consequences. There was one but, though. Her father couldn't find out about her knowledge, as it could have undesirable consequences. She decided that she would tell him that Austin was interested in her wishes, and that would be all. Austin also said something about a possible union between their families and the need for increased security. These conversations might not be important, but they were always a cause for concern in such situations, and the Valita could not ignore them. Her father, after listening to her, immediately began to doubt her words. He asked if this was all the information, and she confirmed it. However, he expressed his disbelief, which made her feel that something might have gone wrong. She realized that her father no longer believed her words. His threat was clear. If she did not reveal the truth, her life would be at risk. He was ready to do everything to find out the truth, and her silence could be fatal. At that moment, the Valita realized that she had no choice but to speak. She knew that her life depended on her honesty, and if she wanted to continue to exist, she would have to reveal everything as it really was. Even if she tried to hide something, her father would not believe her. He was already determined, and if she did not tell the whole truth, he would not stop and would take extreme measures. This moment turned out to be decisive in her fate. Valita knew that in this situation, it was better to allow something important that would change her life than to try to deceive. She realized that her choice was critical, and now all that was left was to accept the inevitable. At that moment, a servant entered the room, reporting the problem. His appearance added tension to the atmosphere because the Valita knew that this was not a random event, but the beginning of something that could change her destiny. Carlon, noticing the anxiety in the air, realized that the situation was taking an unexpected turn. He realized that despite his strict educational methods, he would have to act differently to maintain control over what was happening. The servant reported that there had been another invasion of Ananta. It was not the first such news, but it was still alarming. Such events were always a cause for concern, especially when it came to security. Carlon, not believing his ears, asked the servant again. He could not understand what had happened and tried to comprehend what had been said, his voice full of doubt and tension. As soon as the information reached him, he was stunned. Austin, as always, was on top of her game, reacting to what was happening in a timely manner. Carlon couldn't help but notice her ability to act in such moments, but that didn't lessen his irritation with the whole thing. Carlon couldn't help but scream in frustration. This latest penetration was his limit. All these attempts to disrupt their plans were becoming too frequent, and each time the irritation only grew. Despite the seriousness of the situation, they were unable to deal with those who had been causing such unrest all this time. Recent incidents remained unpunished, which increased the feeling of helplessness. When her father left Valita alone with Luther, could not contain the thoughts that tormented her. She said that she was very sorry that she did not die at that moment. The situation seemed hopeless, and despair took hold of her. Valita, noticing that Luther was standing there doing nothing, asked him why he was not moving. She felt that now was not the time to think, and that he needed to be more decisive. Valita came to the conclusion that perhaps the Duke was interested in something terrible happening to Ananta. All these events that were unfolding seemed too suspicious to be an accident. She felt that this was why everything was happening the way it was. Her intuition told her that there was something more to it than just chance, and her doubts only grew stronger. Luther, realizing the gravity of the situation, was simply furious. His eyes were burning with anger, and without saying a word, he turned and ran towards his father, ready to intervene and stop what was happening. Finally, when Luther left, Valita was able to breathe a sigh of relief. Her nervousness and anxiety subsided a little, and although the tension did not disappear, it was at least momentarily easier. Only 2 days had passed, but Valita immediately realized why she was so tired. From the accumulated worries and stress, her condition had noticeably worsened, and this became obvious to everyone. A maid suddenly burst into the room, concerned about her mistress's condition, and immediately asked if everything was all right. She noticed that Valita looked tired and somewhat exhausted. The twins joined them. Valita said that now that Carlin and Luther were gone, they could warn Austin, but they shouldn't push the situation to the limit to avoid unnecessary casualties. The maid was horrified to see her mistress showing compassion. Even in such a situation, Carlin had almost killed her, and she continued to worry about others, even in such a dangerous situation. Valita remarked that this was exactly why she kept Ananta around, to keep everything under control. Now the situation was resolved, but the maid still felt that nothing was right. She noted with alarm that the deputy head was wrong when he said that the lady was not in her right mind. This made her even more doubtful, although Valita was sure that everything was under control. After that, the maid helped her get settled in the bed. She carefully laid her mistress down, trying not to cause unnecessary discomfort, because Valita was clearly very weak. The twins, although they tried to hide their feelings, were clearly unhappy about something. Their faces reflected anxiety and discontent, although they tried not to express their thoughts out loud. Valita tried to calm the twins down, assuring them that she was fine. She admitted that she had already taken her medication and did not need any further help, so as not to worry them unnecessarily. The maid remarked that it was difficult for her to understand how her mistress could be in such a state after what had happened. It was too difficult to remain calm and not react. She also couldn't understand how they could remain so angry. This feeling wasn't just strange, it sometimes even caused a feeling of surprise. The maid thought that if Rachel and Roxa came at the last moment, it would be a very strange coincidence, which would add more tension to the situation. Despite all this, the lady remained admirable. Even standing under the blade of a sword, she was able to resist these two tyrant personalities, showing her fortitude. She hoped that the mistress was not angry, because in 2 years of work, she had never seen the mistress lose her patience. There was always a calm and balanced look in her eyes. The lady admitted that she sometimes gets angry, but said that if she did it every time, she would simply not have the strength left. She also added that she deliberately provoked Carlin and should not pay attention to him. They had to understand her position, because very soon it would all be over, and they would be able to leave this place where they had been held for so long. Liberation was near. The twins could no longer hide their impatience, and eagerly asked when they would finally be able to kill him, and when the moment they had been waiting for so long would come. The lady smiled and replied that this would happen when they took away everything that was dear to him, deprived him of everything he had. Only then would they be able to achieve their goal. After this, they lay down next to the lady, and she hugged them, giving them a feeling of warmth and security in this anxious moment when everything was decisive. It was time to rest. It had been a long and tiring day, And despite everything that had happened, it was time to prepare for the events that were about to happen, which might change everything. She asked Lucy to turn off the light so that everyone could rest peacefully. The room was silent, and only a faint glow from the window broke the darkness. Everyone settled down, preparing for a night's rest. She and the twins decided to get a good night's sleep. This was important, as there was much to do, and she knew that the better they slept, the easier it would be to cope with the tasks ahead. Valita had never experienced anything like this before. She was used to a completely different way of life, filled with constant problems and unexpected situations, which seemed to be less common here. Kang Hyun, on the other hand, had already gotten used to all sorts of things before her reincarnation. Working in a company under constant pressure taught her to be flexible and adapt to any conditions, even the most difficult ones. Her previous life was just awful, with constant screams from the teacher. She did not understand why she was always to blame for all the failures, and why no one could support her. The teacher often yelled without understanding the problem, and blamed her all the time. Kang Hyun tried to explain that it wasn't her fault, but her words didn't reach her teacher, who only became more and more irritated. Once she tried to say something in response, but the teacher shouted at her to shut up. Her words had no meaning in the eyes of those who were supposed to support and understand her. Both had to follow him, and there was no way to refuse. They could not help but go, despite their discontent and fatigue, because there were obligations they could not ignore. The children were very unbearable, and this caused inconvenience to everyone. There were always problems, and no one knew how to deal with them, despite all attempts to calm them down. She always forbade him to eat cookies. This was a matter of principle for her, and she categorically did not allow herself to deviate from this rule, despite all the persuasions and requests. The orphanage she ended up in was a terrible place. The children lacked the warmth and care of adults. They often suffered from bullying and cruel beatings from other children and some of the caregivers. The situation at school was no better. Teachers paid little attention to her problems, and her classmates were not a support system. Local children often bullied her, pushing her into even greater isolation. Of course, it wasn't fair, but she was used to it. Such things seemed to her a part of life that shouldn't be resisted, and she understood that it was quite expected in her situation. All this became a normal state for her. She learned to cope with it, perceiving it as an integral part of her life. This world was normal for her, even if it was cruel and cold. At least she could still count on some funds. The director of the shelter promised that he would reduce the expenses on pocket money, but this could not really console her in her situation. At one point, she overheard two guys talking about a computer club. They were discussing it as if the place was something important and interesting, and her attention was immediately drawn to their words. The two guys were discussing the club with such enthusiasm that her curiosity was involuntarily piqued. She decided to find out more about what exactly they were talking about and what could interest her in this club. The computer club was on her mind. She was constantly wondering what kind of place it was and whether it could be something meaningful for her. Gradually, it began to take up more and more of her time and attention. She finally decided that she would go there, without knowing why she felt that now was the time to take this step, although she knew that her decision was more impulsive than rational. It didn't even occur to her that she wouldn't be able to afford the luxury of going to such a place. Impulsively, with unconscious determination, she made the decision, not realizing what it might lead to. She entered the game and felt a real thrill, a feeling that here she was, finally in the world she had dreamed of for so long. Her heart was beating happily because there were many unknown possibilities ahead. The game world turned out to be much more complex and multifaceted than she expected. It was like diving into a completely different reality, where every detail mattered and required attention. At that moment, she realized that a path full of challenges and opportunities had opened up before her. A dream that seemed far away began to take shape, and her imagination was filled with the desire to change this world. After finishing her studies, she didn't waste any time and immediately got a job at a game development company. It was a logical step to get closer to her dream and start making it a reality. However, reality turned out to be far from what she imagined. Everything turned out to be much more complicated than in her fantasies, and every day brought new difficulties and obstacles on the way to the goal. Constant comments and criticism from colleagues became part of her daily life. The boss was extremely dissatisfied with her work and the project, which in his opinion had no chance of success. He had said more than once that if they released such a game, the company would certainly go bankrupt. This was his opinion, and it haunted her despite her belief to the contrary. The boss said he was not going to increase the project's budget. He insisted that she take full responsibility for its success or failure, warning that if it failed, she would suffer the consequences. She in turn stated that even these funds would barely be enough for the most basic product. The level of complexity of the project significantly exceeded the requested budget, and she had to find a solution. But despite the difficulties, she did not lose her determination. She firmly stated that she had to do everything possible to create a worthy project within the budget. Otherwise, her dream would remain just a dream. She knew that if she didn't stick to the budget, she would have to cover the costs from her own salary. It was a step she took because she believed in the success of her project. It took her a while to realize how hard it would be to realize this dream. Making a game that would not only be successful, but also bring joy to others, turned out to be much more difficult than she had expected. She was confused. She couldn't understand how it was possible to stay within budget with so many people on the team. Things weren't going as she had hoped, and this thought was becoming more and more depressing. However, she knew that she couldn't just sit back and do nothing. She had to at least try to change the situation, even if it seemed impossible. This was her chance, and she decided not to miss it. It was Friday, and her colleagues were already planning to go out for a drink. They were, as always, waiting for the moment to relax a little, but she was focused on work and couldn't afford it. At this point, the main character suddenly turned to the manager, as if under the influence of a sudden decision. She felt that it was time to talk, although it was unexpected for everyone. She asked the manager to stay and work overtime. The budget was tight, and the release date was already set, and there could be no delays. The responsibility was on her shoulders. But the manager apologized, explaining that it was her father's birthday, and she needed to get home. Kang understood that everyone had important things to do, but this created additional problems for her. If it weren't for the manager's plans, she would have happily stayed on to work overtime. But now, on this evening, the situation didn't allow it. Khan had to accept it with understanding. Although the situation was unpleasant, Kan, as always, quickly realized that there was nothing she could do. It all began to seem pointless. Her colleagues often thought she was crazy for being willing to work overtime, but for her it was important. In any case, they found a great place to relax and decided that they could relax and have a good time. It was a much-needed moment of rest, even with all the difficulties of work. The situation was the same as in school. If the company does not allocate a budget, if the work is huge and colleagues do not care about the project, then the result will always be the same. This was the reality. And then suddenly, Deputy John came over. He asked if she was working overtime today. It was another moment when Khan would have to make a decision that would affect the entire process. He offered to help, but the lady replied that it was not worth doing. Despite her words, he was ready to help if she still decided that he needed support. He added that if there was too much work, it was better to have two brains than just your own. Having said this, he smiled, offering his help without further ado. He also noted that it would not be easier for her to work alone at night. This was especially important to her, and she felt grateful for his offer of help at such a difficult time. Despite the coldness and hostility she encountered from others, she was still grateful for the support she received, even if it was rare and modest. However, all good things must come to an end. She soon realized that everything she had planned had come to its logical conclusion, and she was preparing for a new chapter in her life. The game she conceived with the help of her guards was not just a success. It was a real hit which became a sales leader and brought the company unprecedented popularity and recognition. Margaret's kindness and fairness were the qualities that set her apart from others. Perhaps that is why she was so beloved, and her success was obvious to everyone. Khan strove to create the kind of person she always dreamed of becoming. Her efforts to create an ideal could not fail to bring her success, and this could not go unnoticed. It was hard to understand how anyone could not love her. Her sincerity and desire to help others became what attracted people to her and allowed her to create an atmosphere of respect and recognition around her. Valita woke up and realized that it was morning. She felt slightly tired, But she knew that a new day was ahead of her, with new opportunities and challenges that could not frighten her. The twins were still asleep, and when she turned over, their peaceful appearance filled her with warmth. They looked so vulnerable and sweet that her heart immediately filled with peace. She stroked them gently, feeling her fingers slide through the soft hair. It was then that it dawned on her. It had all been a dream. It was time to let go of the past and forget the images that kept coming back. Life was so difficult and full of challenges that she could count on her fingers all the moments that brought her joy. She did not understand why these memories continued to haunt her, like a dream giving her no peace. She tried to forget what had happened, but despite all her efforts, her memories would not let go. Every time, no matter how hard she tried, the past invariably returned, as if her memory could not forget what had happened. After the balls, where many different topics were discussed, Margaret was always in the center of attention. Her beauty overshadowed everything around her, and she became an object of admiration. Many men sincerely fell in love with hers. The family began to search for various treasures that could provide their sons with a future of tasty and nutritious food. Their desire for wealth and stability led them to new adventures and searches. Ebadian was the eldest daughter in the family, and she was the keeper of an important amulet that had been passed down in their family for generations. It was a sign of her responsibility and the power she possessed. Her family was part of a guild that specialized in supplying metal needed to create magical tools. Collaboration with other craftsmen would be beneficial for everyone, and they were willing to develop this direction. Carlon could not allow the man to think of looking for blue gold elsewhere. This was not just a demand, but a mandatory condition that he dictated in order to maintain his position. The Abaddon family was only alive because of the support of the Alden family. Without their help, they would not have survived in this difficult political situation, and Carlon knew it very well. Only the Alden family had the ability to supply monastones to the Flame Guild. However, betrayal on their part would mean the loss of all benefits, and Carlon was not prepared to turn a blind eye to that. Valita couldn't help but notice how threats and manipulation had become her father's signature style. It was his way of keeping everyone in line, always playing on the fears and interests of others. However, if someone else decides to start producing magical tools, the consequences will be very serious. It will disrupt the established system and create unexpected difficulties for everyone involved. In order to create magical tools, two key components are needed: mana ore, which is infused with mana, and blue gold, which activates these magical properties, combining them into one whole. Blue gold was a rare and hard-to-find resource, unlike mana stones. It could only be found in deep mines where extraction required not only effort, but also great risks. Due to the shortage of deposits, rumors spread that the Ebadin family had decided to sell blue gold to other guilds. This caused many questions and discontent among competitors. Carlon could not forgive such a thing. Such a move from Ebadin would be a betrayal, and he was prepared to act decisively to prevent any attempt to disrupt the established order. They had no choice but to submit, because their situation was too difficult to try to change anything. The only thing left was to submit to the circumstances. However, Valita had heard rumors that the Crown Prince was indeed interested in their mines. This made her wary, as if he decided to take them under his wing, it could change the situation. Margaret confirmed this information, but her father was very worried. If they made a deal with the imperial family, it would certainly displease the Marquis, who would hardly agree with such a decision. Margaret was increasingly doubtful about how long the Crown Prince would be able to protect their family. Trusting him was dangerous. His intentions could change, and she had to be careful. There was no guarantee that he would not give up the idea of supporting them. Too much depended on his will, and Margaret understood that her trust in the prince could be mistaken and not justified. In fact, there was a bad ending in the game where Margaret mistakenly sold all the mines to the Crown Prince. This thought made her think, maybe it was worth making moves that were not in the original game. Valita suggested that Margaret inform the Crown Prince that they were not yet ready to sell the mines. This was an important decision, as the situation could change if they acted hastily. Things weren't perfect at the moment. There were problems with the production of the Kirk instruments that required immediate attention. Margaret agreed with the plan and decided not to rush into a final decision. Margaret didn't ask unnecessary questions, wasn't interested in the causal side of what was happening. She trusted Valita completely, knowing that her decisions were always based on common sense and due caution. Every time Margaret acted on her instructions, she felt some kind of internal tension, as if something was wrong. This feeling did not leave her, and it seemed to her that something was constantly scratching at her soul. However, there was another important moment in her life that partly worried her. It was a marriage proposal, which was not as simple as it seemed at first glance. It entailed a lot of consequences. Valita had heard about the many offers that Margaret was currently receiving. She already felt that the young girl had most likely chosen one of the admirers, because there were always suitors around her. Margaret confidently stated that this was not so that she did not understand how a choice could be made when she had not yet seen any of the contenders. It seemed to her an absurd and premature decision. Valita, as always, remained unwavering in her judgments, and given the political situation, understood that Margaret had little understanding of such matters. But this did not surprise her. She only watched from the sidelines. Valita had not come to discuss the matter. She was more interested in finding out whether Margaret had been invited to the ball. The event always attracted the attention of high society, and her participation could have made a big difference. Margaret explained that there were many invitations, but she refused all but those with whom her family had long-standing relationships. She did not have enough time to take part in other events. It was all too tiring. Margaret was never accustomed to this. She knew she needed connections in high places to strengthen her position and expand her influence. This was an important element of her future, so she suggested that Valita take on this task and bring people to her side. She felt that the time had come to act and build relationships with those who could help in the current situation. Valita noticed that Margaret was still not used to balls and official events. However, she had too few acquaintances among the aristocracy to promote herself and make the necessary connections. So to help her, it was necessary to open a salon. It was a great way to give Margaret the opportunity to interact with the right people and strengthen her position among the highborn. The salon in aristocratic circles was not just a place for meetings, but also a center for finding new acquaintances. Thematic evenings held there became an excellent opportunity for social exchanges. There, among conversations and meetings, hidden talents were revealed and useful connections were made. It was a wonderful way to advance Margaret in high society and consolidate her status in society. However, opening such a salon would require money that Valita could not find in her sources. This meant that she would have to turn to the Crown Prince for the necessary loan. Jaron asked the lady again if she really wanted to send Lady Abodine to the palace to ask the prince for money. He could not understand how she could decide to take such a step. He was shocked because if the prince took this as impudence, then all their plans could collapse. It was really risky, but Valita was sure of her goal. But in Valita's opinion, there was nothing to worry about. Margaret had received the amulet because of her outstanding abilities, and it could play a key role in their future success. This amulet could not only help keep the Aldens in check, but also strengthen the Emperor's power. So despite all the risks, Valita believed that everything was in order and their actions were justified. Jaron understood her point, but despite that, he couldn't help but wonder what the theme of this salon would be. It was an important clarification to understand how exactly they would move forward. The lady thought about the attention that the magical blue gold attracted, and about people who understood mana stones. It was more than just interest. It was a market with many opportunities. Now the blue gold trade was being talked about more and more often, as well as the flaming goings-on in the guild. People were discussing it at dinner and meetings, which fueled interest in the topic. There was a growing feeling that something important was about to happen. They needed craftsmen who could set up and prepare treats. This was not just a requirement, but a necessity for a successful start. Without good specialists, the business will not advance. People were willing to pay money for delicious desserts, and this played into the mistress's hands. Nothing could compare to the pleasure of enjoying caramel apples. This would be a real hit if approached correctly. All the ingredients for the desserts were available, and the quality was excellent. If the reviews of the salon were positive, it would soon become a topic of conversation in society. Delicious treats could bring success. She also inquired about the status of the fake badge. This question was no less important than any preparations for the opening. Everything had to be top-notch so that everything would go off without a hitch. Jaron reported that the fake badge was almost ready. He promised that the lady would receive it on the opening day of the salon. This was important for both of them because details played a significant role in the success of her business. It would be wonderful to have a holy reunion. But now she had to think about what dessert to treat Austin to. She knew that this choice mattered, and she wanted to make it memorable. As always, Jaron walked his mistress to the carriage. He was her loyal assistant and support, and this became their ritual. His presence gave a feeling of security and confidence that everything would be fine. At the end, Jaron kissed her hand without wishing her safe travels. The gesture was simple but important. It was a sign of respect, and the lady felt warmth and sincerity in it. The lady said goodbye to him, smiling back. She appreciated his devotion and attention, and their farewells became habitual, but always left a feeling of comfort and understanding. The budget was small, and it was necessary to distribute the funds correctly. Everything depended on how to properly manage the available resources. Small expenses at the start could lead to great results in the future. The manager said that it was necessary to create a quality game. Games with a good plot were always popular. This was the key to success, and the lady knew that she had to put all her efforts into it. Executive Khan said that her new game, which she would invest her personal funds in, would be significantly more exciting and engaging than those she had created before. It was a promise. Jaron didn't just decide to pay attention to what was happening. He knew for sure that Valita really did resemble Khan. It wasn't just his impression, but a real resemblance that he noticed. Margaret decided to visit His Highness in person to communicate an important request. She had already prepared everything she wanted to say, and confident in her words, she went to him with a clear intention. The girl did not give him time to think and insisted on 2 audiences to get her words across. She was determined, and the prince, seeing her persistence, felt that her request was worth listening to. However, her suddenness and serious look left him with questions. What could have happened that she came now? Her behavior was alarming, and the prince could not understand what was hidden behind her request. Perhaps a sudden problem had arisen in her life, and she could not just leave it unsolved. The prince was eager to learn all the details, hoping to understand what was really going on. The girl told him that she currently needed money to implement her idea. The prince was interested, and she, without hiding her intentions, said that her request would concern the opening of a salon. When the crown prince heard her words, he was stunned. Opening a salon? This was something unexpected. He was a little puzzled, but he decided to listen to her until the end, to understand what she wanted from him. She explained that her plan would not only help her make connections, but would also allow her to find like-minded people. With this approach, she hoped to create a space for herself and others who shared her ideas. Of course, she wasn't going to ask for his help just like that. She didn't have the necessary funds to open a salon, so she was looking for support. But she had other resources, her skills and experience. In return, she offered her labor and skills. If the opening of the salon is successful, the prince will have the opportunity to take control of the Alden family business, which opens up new horizons for him. He had long been aware that they had problems with the production of magical instruments. These difficulties were on the surface, and everyone involved was aware of the situation. He was no exception. The crown prince quickly responded to the situation and said that he fully agreed with the proposal. His decision was made instantly, leaving no time for reflection, which confirmed his confidence. However, the prince added an important condition. He would visit the salon, but now in the status of an investor. This gave him new rights and opportunities, which is quite logical in the context of his interests and influence. So if that was all that needed to be discussed, then once all the formalities were completed, they could move on. All the details were settled, and the parties could continue their business. The lady was sincerely grateful to him for his support and decision, which was reflected in her smile. It was a sign of appreciation that did not go unnoticed, as her emotions were sincere and genuine. When she left the room, the prince could not help but smile. His face lit up with a slight expression of pleasure, which, despite his strict nature, did not appear often. Margaret had indeed left an indelible impression on him. Her personal qualities, Her confidence and her courage in making decisions stood out even against the background of his usual reserve and affection for her. She showed courage when she did not ask for money on loan, but simply made a decision boldly going towards her goal. This was her principled position, and although she was decisive, her boldness could not leave anyone indifferent. And it seemed that the Crown Prince was truly pleased with this. He felt a slight satisfaction from having met such a determined and goal-oriented woman who was not afraid to follow her principles. Of course it was. Not every person could make him smile like that, because despite his status, inner coldness was his peculiarity. However, Margaret changed that. She said he was capable of taking control of the Aldens, and that interested him. Question: does her friend know about it? It seems that Alden's daughter has decided to help Lady Abaddon in her case. But even if Lady Alden did help her, the question remains, how did she learn such important information? Lady Valita is clearly not who everyone thinks she is. There is something about her that does not add up. He admitted that Graham was indeed right. It confirmed his view of the situation, and he now sees the picture a little differently, although he still doesn't fully understand all the nuances of what is happening. She has apparently made the decision to work with Lady Abaddon to help control her father. It is a strategic move that opens up new opportunities for both sides and strengthens their positions. The Crown Prince noticed that Graham was showing interest in her after all. The situation takes on additional nuances, and it seems that Graham should now be glad that such interest exists. Graham was quick to deny these speculations, saying that his worries were completely unrelated to this. Obviously, he was not going to go to the salon with him, so he would entrust security to someone else. He wondered who would go with him to the salon. The question was not easy, and Graham understood that the decision would not be so easy because it could affect the outcome of the upcoming meeting. Graham tried to pretend he didn't care, even turning away from the Crown Prince. It was his way of hiding his own feelings, although it wasn't entirely successful, since everyone could clearly see his state. However, it seemed he had agreed to go with him after all. It would have been difficult to back down from that decision, especially in a situation like this, when all eyes were on him and his actions. The Alden family's magical tool business has been going through a rough patch lately. The once stable business is now facing serious difficulties, and this could not help but affect their situation. Noah's servant noticed that they had tried to hide the problems, but now the decline in production had become so large that it was no longer possible to hide anything. Everyone could see that the situation was worse than they had tried to imagine. Both customers and anyone who dealt with the Aldens had already noticed the decline in quality along with the decline in production. It was obvious and no one could ignore it, which put the family in an even more vulnerable position. It all started almost 2 years ago when the situation started to deteriorate and the first signs of trouble became obvious. It all looked like a coincidence, but then it became clear that the situation was not that simple. The Duke was quite surprised to hear how long it had been going on. He had not expected that such events could drag on for so long, nor that their consequences would be so devastating to the entire region. It was at that moment that the beginning of this decline began, which began to develop and became more noticeable with each passing day. It seemed that events were gaining strength and were beginning to affect many people. If all this is true, then this is the first serious problem that Ananta has faced. 2 years ago, there was a slave escape that shook her entire system, disrupting the usual order. Even then, production was threatened, and all this caused serious economic damage. Much time passed, and the situation only worsened, as if its traces continued to haunt them. And that day, the Tang clan twins went missing. Their disappearance was yet another link in a chain of events that seemed to leave no hope for a quick resolution. Everything was intertwined. The escape of the slaves, the disappearance of the twins, and the strange girl who bought them. In addition, another mystery was written into this complex pattern: her strange behavior. It's strange to think that Valita could have been the girl who became part of this incident, but perhaps she wasn't. It's hard to believe that she was involved in such important events. She was a mysterious person who immediately recognized Duke Elsius, but did not hesitate and decided to help him despite her strangeness and the dangers that could lie in wait for her. And then, as if nothing had happened, she began to act as if she had nothing to do with what had happened. Her actions remained unclear, and no one could figure out exactly what was behind her actions. She wasn't afraid to say everything she thought to his face. Her words were honest and harsh, and she didn't try to hide her true intentions, despite the possible consequences. The girl who was oblivious to all the cruelty she faced, despite her origins, was the daughter of the snake Alden. The failures, trials, and cruelty of her life did not break her. He was sure that she was not, as she was often described. All this did not correspond to her true nature, and he knew that behind it there was a completely different personality hidden from prying eyes. But was she really as talented as he thought? He began to ponder this and decided to find out more. To confirm his suspicions, he turned to questions about the slaves who made the mana stones. Those who followed Ananta were able to rescue several people from this hell. However, many were still in captivity. The Duke ordered that the rescued slaves should be monitored so that they did not escape, as they could be used as witnesses. These slaves could help if they were treated and protected, but if they started a rebellion, no one could predict what would happen to them. The situation was extremely dangerous and required careful handling. The Duke smiled and said that he needed these slaves, not only to help, but also to be under control until the situation was resolved. Everything had to be carefully thought out and without unnecessary risks. If done correctly, they would be released immediately, and it would be certain that any remaining evidence would be eliminated. The entire operation required the utmost caution. In addition, the report on the new production of magical instruments that he had requested was presented. The document was ready, and its contents reflected the importance and success of the work performed. Such a diverse range and quality of products was simply unimaginable. It was truly an impressive achievement that opened up new horizons for further research and implementation of technologies. The Duke was very impressed, and without hiding his interest, expressed a desire to know where the workshops were. This place intrigued him, and he wanted to get exact information about its location. The servant reported that the workshops were scattered across different locations, so it was quite difficult to find them. Because of this, the search was not as easy as one would like and required additional efforts. The Duke, not losing his resolve, said that they should continue searching if they were really the same as the Aldens. He understood that such places should be under reliable control, and he did not intend to retreat. He also added that he was interested in a magic tool designed for soundproofing. This was an important detail that could play a role in his future plans. At that moment, the exact same instrument was in the coffee shop. It could not be a coincidence, and its presence in such a place made one think about many things, perhaps about the events associated with it. The Duke realized that he could no longer doubt what was happening. All the elements were coming together to form a single picture, and doubts were leaving, giving way to confidence and the need to act. He wondered if perhaps he should visit the place again to find out all the details. There was something that was drawing him back, perhaps some important information that could be revealed on a subsequent visit. He began to wonder if she really knew about the events surrounding Anant. It could all be connected somehow with that unusual incident that had happened 3 years ago, and that thought kept running through his mind. In the end, he decided to meet her to finally clarify all the circumstances. This was necessary in order to clarify the situation and get answers to all the questions that arose.